Good morning. Good morning, everybody, on this rainy morning in Washington, D.C. Welcome to America's Next Revolution, Clean Industrial, the first summit of this kind. And welcome to all the folks that are following along on our live stream as well. We at ClearPath are very excited to be partnering with the Clean Air Task Force, as well as a group of experts and innovators convened here today to talk about how the United States can lead the world on lower emissions from the industrial sector. It's an exciting time in America. Thanks to our lower energy prices, global decoupling due to tragic geopolitics, and our infrastructure policy, we're building again at a speed and scale we haven't seen in generations. It's an incredibly dynamic new time in our economy, and that will literally reshape the face of the country. And this means our major industries are growing in a big way. And that's a very good thing as we offset less clean development around the world. At home, that does mean our industrial emissions are set to be the top source of U.S. emissions by 2030, surpassing both electric power and transportation. Globally, industrial emissions are already 40%, the largest and most important source of emissions, but they're hardly talked about here in D.C. But there's good news. Leaders from across the major industrial subsectors are taking action, as are their representatives here in D.C. Innovators are developing bold new ideas to reimagine industrial commodities. Capital formation is beginning around big new projects and ideas and clean industrial hubs. And policymakers are taking note and taking action themselves. You're going to hear today about federal R&D investments and innovations and private sector breakthroughs underway in three key industrial subsectors: steel, cement, concrete and asphalt, and chemicals. We're really excited to see the Steel Upgrading Partnerships and Emissions Reduction Act, that was the SUPER Act, the best named acronym act of 2021, included in the CHIPS Plus package last Congress, and the direction that it provides DOE to drive decarbonization for the steel sector for the first time. We're interested in taking a similar approach for cement, concrete, and asphalt, and chemicals to make a big impact and spur further innovation and industrial applications for clean technologies. Pairing these incredible innovations with smart policies will accelerate clean energy technology use for the industrial sector and get those clean industrial technologies to market, maximizing America's advantage with the cleanest environmental standards in the world. Before we dive in, just a couple of housekeeping updates. As I mentioned, we're live streaming and the entire conversation is on the record. Someone just noted to me it is the National Press Club, so that sort of does itself. For our first block, we're very excited to welcome U.S. Department of Energy Undersecretary for Infrastructure David Crane, followed by several panels as well as a bipartisan group of policymakers. We'll then take a break before finishing the summit with an additional panel. And probably the most important thing on a gray, rainy, early morning is that there is coffee located on both sides of the room and breakfast continuously. So please just help yourselves through the morning. So I'd now like to welcome our partner, Lindsay Griffith, the U.S. Advocacy and Policy Director for the Clean Air Task Force, and Undersecretary Crane. Let's all give them a warm round of applause.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Rich, for that introduction. Thank you to all of you for being here this morning. We're going to get started with a really exciting discussion, I think. Thank you so much to Undersecretary Crane for being here. Just a little bit about him. David Crane is a leading business voice in the field of sustainability, clean energy, and climate change. Prior to his confirmation, 1 month ago, as Undersecretary for Infrastructure, he served as Director of DOE's Office of Clean Energy Demonstration. Outside of government, Crane was the CEO of Climate Real Impact Solutions and served on the boards of Heliogen Incorporated, Source Global, Jarrah Company Incorporated, and Tata Steel Limited, along with the not-for-profit boards of Elemental Accelerator and the Climate Group NA. He was also part of the B team, serving as a leader and chairing the organization's Net Zero Initiative. Previously, Crane was the CEO of NRG, and during his 12-year tenure, he took NRG from Chapter 11 to a Fortune 200 company. So please, again, let's welcome David Crane to the stage. we're going to kick it off. Let's get right into the topic of industrial decarbonization. Why don't we? That's why we're here. So you're all here because you understand that industrial decarbonization is critically important to achieving our climate goals. That's what we work on at Clean Air Task Force. This sector is on track to unfortunately being the highest emitting in the United States by 2030. And global cement production on its own will have more emissions and releases as much carbon as is produced by the entire country of India. We've heard about some of the work that DOE has been doing. I'm sure you all have, and we'll hear more about that today. But specifically, DOE has been recently, I want to ask you about the roadmap. So we have an industrial decarbonization roadmap that DOE recently released. And I understand there's going to be some subsector roadmaps that will be released soon. So can you tell us a little bit about maybe what's the top takeaway for you from the industrial decarbonization roadmap?
Well, I mean, first of all, thank you for being here. Thank you for having me, and thanks for the work that you all do and everyone in the audience does. But these liftoff reports, I think the first thing about the liftoff reports, and there are 4 out there, and the ones that have to do with industrial decarb, they've been previewed, but the full report I don't think has been available yet, but will be available in the next week or two. The first thing is just the tone setting of these reports is that it's no longer a dirty word to talk about the United States government engaging in industrial policy, right? And industrial policy is very pragmatic. It's not political. It's what works in our commercial landscape. So the first thing about the liftoff reports that are out there about hydrogen and long-duration energy storage is that they're very candid assessments of what it's going to take to get these new emerging technologies to full commercialization. And so that's number one. And number two is what we're trying to send a signal to people on the outside is that the government's committed to deal with the obstacles. So, we all know using hydrogen as an example, and I use hydrogen because the hydrogen program in sequence is a little bit ahead of the industrial decarb. Hydrogen report comes out. It says the biggest issue in hydrogen is creating demand for hydrogen in the near term. Every country that has a hydrogen program is saying the exact same thing. This is not any great revelation. But a month ago, the DOE announced $1 billion of the bipartisan infrastructure law into a hydrogen demand vehicle. So part of the point of these liftoff reports is not just to tell everyone the specifics of what the challenge is, but to show that the government is here to do whatever the government can done, all within the context of all this is going to be private sector-led, government-enabled. And the industrial decarb reports are more in that same path, and there are 3 of them. One of them has to do with chemical and petrochemical industry. One of them has to do with cement. And then, very importantly, and I say this because I insisted upon this, there's a wrap that talks about industrial decarbonization of the 7 hard-to-abate sectors against each other. And the reason that that's so important is because right now we have a solicitation out. Final bids are due on August 11th for $6.3 billion for industrial decarb. To me, it's probably, with hydrogen, the most impactful thing the government's doing. It's also the most unique. Again, a lot of countries have hydrogen programs. I don't think any country has anything like $6 billion to get at, the issue that you said that, this is a big chunk of global emissions. It's growing because, all these sectors have unfortunately been put in the hard-to-abate sectors. So that, gives industry sort of a free ticket to not think about this until the 2030s, which, none of us can afford.
Right. So you mentioned the hydrogen report. Looking ahead to the liftoff report for industrial decarbonization, what are you thinking about DOE taking action on after that liftoff report comes out?
Well, I mean, one of the things that's in the bipartisan infrastructure, traditionally demonstration projects to the DOE meant, demonstrate technologies at scale, whether they're commercial, whether they become rusting hulks a year after that you've demonstrated. Traditionally, the DOE hasn't cared. But it's very intentional in the bipartisan infrastructure law that these aren't just supposed to be demonstration projects, they're supposed to be foundational elements of the clean energy economy. So, one of the things my end of the DOE is very focused on is the totality of these projects, the ecosystem that they that they're going to come online into. So again, we're looking at demand. We're looking how well the industry is organized. Going back to demand, we're not just looking about who's got contracted demand, but what's the potential. Are big buyers of steel more prepared to buy a zero carbon version of steel than big buyers of aluminum are more prepared to buy zero carbon versions of aluminum? So one of the things we can do, the traditional, and I should say about the industrial decarb solicitation, we were very, very pleased with the level of interest, at the concept paper stage across all of the industry. So part of it is not just a competition between who's got the best projects, but which industry is prepared and best organized, to achieve deep decarbonization sooner rather than later. And so again, mobilizing buyers as well as producers. Sometimes it's a question of the product definition to make sure. These are industrial commodities that have to have certain performance characteristics, and so it's the totality of the ecosystem that we're looking at.
So you mentioned mobilizing buyers and producers in the industrial space. What are you hoping that the private sector is going to take away from that liftoff report when it comes out?
The most important thing, not just from the liftoff report, and I alluded to this earlier, but I've talked to quite a number of industrial CEOs who are not. I come from the energy industry, so I've spent a lot of time over my life talking to electric company CEOs. But before this job, I had not spent a lot of time talking to steel, aluminum, concrete CEOs. And first of all, their commitment to achieve deep decarbonization, whether it's because they see it inevitable or because it's part of their personal legacy, surprised me. It's extraordinary. But when I talk to people who buy industrial commodities and people that produce it, they're like, well, okay, we're hard to abate. So we all have our zero carbon targets in 2040 or 2050, and they all sort of follow a four-part path. First we do efficiency, then we do, and that's from now to 2025. Then we electrify everything we can. That's 2025 into early 30s. Then we get to the tough one, industrial heat. And that's a sort of 2030s into the 2040s. And then there'll be a tail, which we can't get rid of, and so we'll plant trees or something like that. That's sort of their four-part. So I would say that to make it very, broad brush, simple, our goal is to bring that third step, which is where most of and where government can play a role, because it's the hardest step, is to change the mentality of both producers and buyers, that if you think you can wait around till 2035, you want to be a leader in your industry, you want to be a leader in front of your customers, you want to be a leader in front of your employees, but you think you can wait to 2035 and be a leader, you cannot. Because the federal government is going to use every power at its disposal, not just these programs, government procurement. The government directly or indirectly pays for 60% of the cement used in the United States. Now, how you translate that into sending a market signal through government procurement that we want green cement, that's something we're still working on with the White House, because it's a very complicated procurement chain. But the intent is there, and that's important.
You mentioned, your background in energy and specifically working in power. What do you see as some of the unique challenges about decarbonizing industry, and how has your experience in power, can you say more about how that's informed what you're doing now?
Well, there's a lot of obvious challenges. The challenge that I am very aware of, and maybe it doesn't come naturally to people in government. If you think of the electricity system compared to heavy industry, it's pretty distributed. There's a lot of power plants. It's hard to say now with the heat wave around the country, but over the course of the year, the American electric system works at something like a 45% capacity factor. So, you could take a plant offline and, decarbonize it. But, one of the things the liftoff reports is going to say, which probably obvious to everyone in the room, I didn't know this, that 50% of the industrial emissions in the United States are from the petrochemical and chemical industry. the refining system in the United States, works on a very thin, it's very finely calibrated to demand. Can you imagine if, and there's not that many refineries, and there's, 10 or 20 huge refineries in the United States that we all depend on. So, one of the things that I think makes it difficult is that the potential for short to medium term disruption while you're decarbonizing is something that we have to take into account and we cannot afford because, there are still people in this country who, oppose what we're trying to do here. And, you see like with the Texas crisis of a couple of years ago, the first thing that some politicians do is they blame wind and solar when in fact it was, natural gas, was not getting out of the ground because it was frozen. There are people that, would blame this brown to green movement if suddenly, there's a crisis at the gas pump. And so it's achieving this speedy transformation without disrupting short to medium term supply.
Decarbonizing under disruption is a huge challenge, I think, across many of the decarbonizing sectors, not just industry. But I guess for this liftoff report specifically, as you look at where the private sector is going to be engaging with the department, how do you view the actions that in partnership you're going to be taking going forward? Where are you going to start, right, with this industry? As you said, moving up the conversation to sooner than 2030. How is this liftoff report and other efforts, what other efforts at DOE are going to help accelerate that?
Well, focusing on the liftoff reports, there sort of be a shared understanding between, and there's supposed to be, and this is the part I want to get out even if you weren't asked about this, there's supposed to be living documents that are informed by what you're learning, by what we're learning. So just in the course of the original drafting of these liftoff reports, I think a lot of people in the room, contributed to that, and we tried to get in there. But what we're working on actually this week is, okay, how are we going to keep these things updated? And part of this is that, I don't want to call the technologies that we've been tasked by the bipartisan infrastructure law with, scaling as immature technology. Let's call them maturing technologies. But I think, coming basically from Wall Street in terms, because, I ran a power company, but I'm more a finance, guy, is that when people talk about immature and mature and the private sector willingness to deploy capital against technology and the willingness of buyers to think that they're buying from a proven technology, a lot of that is the knowledge gap. And so part of the ongoing intent of the liftoff reports is to be living, breathing documents, a source of current knowledge to demystify these maturing technologies so that private sector buyers, the whole complex can get comfortable, with what the risks actually are as opposed to theoretical risks.
Well, we're nearly to the end of our conversation.
Yeah, I see the red light.
Yeah, maybe just I'll give you a chance. Any parting thoughts for our audience here? We've got, a group of folks who are both in industry, who are looking at these solutions, thinking about decarbonization, and thinking about working across the aisle to accomplish our goals for the industrial sector. So any final thoughts you'd like to just offer for them? Well,
sometimes, when you get into the details, you sort of miss the big picture. The first thing I would say, and, the fact that you're here early in the morning to listen to, a government bureaucrat means that you already get it. But it's, I try and emphasize to everyone how much the moment is now, in the sense we mentioned the $6 billion that's due on August 10th. Even before that, on July 31st, we have applications due for the $10 billion manufacturing, the 48C, build something, get 30%, reimbursed from the government. And so the importance of the historic moment, I like to, not to broad brush young people, but like, this is a historical moment. Like I say to the people in the DOE, we've got super bright people in the DOE, and I'm like, man, you're gonna have a long career. Careers can be linear in terms of, if you're capable and hardworking, you go up, you get more responsibility. But what's not linear about life is impact. And so what I'm trying to say within the DOE is like, whether you're at the top of the organization, middle of the organization, or bottom of the organization, you're critically important, and you have to accept that what you do right now, very likely could be the most important thing you do in your life.
No pressure, right?
So it's a big burden, but it's on all of us. So like, I'm just like, everyone's hands on the oars. Let's all row in the same direction.
Thank you, Undersecretary Crane. Please join me in thanking him for coming to see us this morning. We really appreciate it.
Well, that was a terrific conversation. So as we do a quick change of stage here, first one housekeeping note. Good news, a lot of people came, even though we started very early in the morning. Bad news, it actually means we're starting to run out of seats. So if you're sitting like not in the middle of a row, if you could start migrating toward the middle of your row so that we would open up some more seats on the end so some of the folks that are coming in can come and join us and sit down as opposed to lurking on the sides, if folks don't mind. Thank you so much. That was a terrific conversation. One of my major takeaways from that was just the key reminder about making sure we're working with actual offtake. That, the idea that there's an old DOE that would have been okay with demonstration projects becoming, I think that the line was rusting hulks, left around the country, as opposed to things that were actually productively supplying clean steel or concrete or chemicals or something into our economy. DOE's already made huge strides in working with buyers up front when selecting projects and technologies, and it's terrific to hear that that's being used as a major feature in selecting this next generation of industrial projects too. So super insightful conversation, and huge thanks to Undersecretary Crane for coming and joining us, and to Lindsay for leading that great conversation. So now I'd like to welcome our first panel, which will be ably moderated by the great Zan Fishman. He's the Director of Energy Policy and Carbon Management at the Bipartisan Policy Center. BPC has really been on the front lines of working on this industrial decarbonization conversation, including through their Net Zero Business Alliance. So please join me in welcoming Zan and our first panel from some of the largest companies in the steel, cement, concrete, and asphalt industries to discuss how they plan to leverage their existing capabilities to decrease emissions and support U.S. jobs. Welcome.
Hello. All right. Starting off the event great. I always say that when the crane arrives, it's time to start building. So, okay. So, we're here to talk about industrial decarbonization, which is, as you've heard, a big emissions sector. And there's a big controversy. Are these hard to abate sectors? How hard is hard? Is there cause for optimism? Spoiler alert, yes. We've got a really great group here of experts in iron, steel, cement, asphalt, to talk through some of the industrial challenges and opportunities, talk through some of the recent legislation that's been passed, and also to talk about what future legislation should be passed in order to enable these industries to hit the decarbonization goals that they have and that we all need. So just to start us off, I'm just going to go down the line and allow each of the panelists to introduce their company or organization, get a little feel and flavor for who they are, and then we're going to dig into the tough questions. So first off, we have Melissa Carey, Head of Climate and ESG Policy and Government Affairs at Holcim.
Great, thank you. Nice to see you all today. Thanks a lot for having me. And on behalf of the whole team at Wholesome US, we are really excited about joining this conversation that we're having today. Thank you. For those of you who don't know us, we are the global leader in innovative building solutions. We are 70,000 people around the world who are passionate about helping people and the planet with building progress through 4 business segments: cement, ready-mix, concrete, aggregates, and wholesome building envelope. In the US, we operate just about 350 sites in 43 states. We have 7,000 employees, and we operate 13 cement plants, including the world's largest such facility in St. Genevieve, Missouri. Our company's mission is to decarbonize buildings. That includes one of the toughest challenges, which is taking cement manufacturing down to net zero emissions. Our journey is driven by science. Wholesome is the first in the materials industry to have its net zero roadmap, 2030 and 2050 targets independently validated by the Science Based Targets Initiative. And these targets require us to cut our emissions across the full value chain, including scope 1, 2, and 3. Our scope 1 emissions are the biggest. We're tackling that, yes, by upgrading our plants and switching to lower carbon fuels, but primarily focused on carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Scope 2 emissions require our investment in development and deployment of renewable energy. And of course, electric vehicles and biofuels are the focus in scope 3. I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. I'm hoping we can get into some of the meat of the challenges as well as the opportunities, and I really appreciate you having me here. Thanks.
Thanks, Melissa. Next up, Kevin Dempsey, the president and CEO of the American Iron and Steel Institute.
Thanks, Stan. It's great to be with you all today. Really excited to be part of this conversation. We represent the steel industry in the United States, steel producers and key suppliers and customers of the industry. And what I think is really important to understand is the steel industry in the United States is not your grandfather's steel industry. People think of steel as being smokestacks with big, heavy clouds of smoke coming out over the top. But in fact, the steel industry in the United States has already made significant changes from that past. And we're, in fact, leading the world in terms of clean steel production for a variety of reasons. One is we have used a variety of different technologies for current production. About 70% of the steel made in the United States today is actually made through a recycling process where you're taking steel scrap, old cars, refrigerators, et cetera, crushing those down, melting those using electricity to make new steel. But you can't use just scrap. You need a virgin iron from iron ore to add to that scrap supply. And there our industry is also innovating by moving beyond just the traditional way, which involved using a lot of coal to make something called coke to reduce the iron ore to the virgin iron to make steel. And today we're using more and more natural gas, using different technologies like what's called direct reduction of iron, using 100% natural gas. But those, importantly, are technologies that can be easily transferred over to the use of clean hydrogen when that's available. So we're very excited about that prospect. The other thing I would say about the steel industry in the United States, and so we represent companies that are primarily using the recycling method, companies that are primarily using iron ore, and companies that have a mix of both. And what's most important to understand about our industry is there's not going to be one single way to get to zero. All of our companies are significantly committed to getting to zero, and they've all made very significant commitments in terms of reductions by 2030 and on to 2050. But they're pursuing a variety of paths because our industry is very competitive, and frankly, demonstrating that you can produce a clean product that can meet your customers' needs is really one of the most significant driving forces in the steel market today. And so our companies are competing vigorously with each other, and frankly, that's one of the, I think, going to be one of the keys to continuing that progress, to really harness the power of the market to encourage continued decarbonization for steel. So thank you. Glad to be here.
Terrific, and that's such a good point that's valid across the industries here and across most of the decarbonization challenge, is that there are so many different challenges that require a bunch of different solutions. There's no silver bullet to all of this. We need a lot of solutions and a lot of work, a lot of innovation. Next up, we've got Jeray Carlson, Senior Vice President of Sustainability, Communications, and Public Affairs at Cemex.
Good morning. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you for having us. I really appreciate the opportunity to join this conversation as well. Cemex is a global building materials company. We produce cement, concrete, aggregates, and also urbanization solutions. Globally, we have 43,000 employees and 60 cement mills and grinding facilities. In the U.S., we have 10 plants, and we have a workforce of almost 10,000. We have also had our targets validated by this SBTI, which we have found to be incredibly important. It lends credibility to our targets, both internally and with our investors and stakeholders who are also invested in our decarbonization journey. We have a net zero goal for 2050, and we are diligently working on that. It's going to go across our entire value chain. In terms of the rest of our value chain, we have 8 cement plants operating. We have 50 aggregate quarries. We have almost 300 ready-mix plants. We have cement terminals as well. So we too will be focusing heavily on Scope 1 emissions in cement, and then also we're working in parallel on Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions. We understand that time is short, and it is a race, and we are all working diligently, independently as companies, but also as U.S. industry. Our U.S. industry has a roadmap to carbon neutrality, and it's been a great opportunity to collaborate and move the needle. One of the greatest things about all the attention that's been given to the cement industry, I think, is that we can now have more open conversations and demystify our operations in the production process, because there are a lot of things that people have misperceptions about. And I believe there's a growing understanding of the opportunities that we have, and we're looking forward to continuing the journey. So thank you again for having me.
All right, let there be light. And rounding us out at the other end of the stage, Eunice Heath, SVP and Chief Sustainability Officer at CRH.
Yes, let there be light, right? Good morning, everyone, and it truly is a pleasure to be with you today. As you can hear from my colleagues, there's a lot going on in our industrial sector to reduce CO2 emissions. My name is Eunice Heath, and I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for CRH. I spent 31 years in the chemical sector before I joined CRH in January of this year. For those that don't know, CRH, we are a diversified building materials company. We're headquartered in Ireland. However, our U.S. headquarters is in Atlanta, Georgia, and we are the largest asphalt paver in the U.S. Last year's revenue for the company was $33 billion, and 63% of the revenue comes out of our Americas region. We operate sites here in the U.S. out of 47 states. We're a global company with a local brand recognition. So here in the U.S., you would know us on the asphalt side. Old Castle Infrastructure would be our brand that you would know us by. We employ 75,000 employees around the world with 3,100 operating sites. Here in the U.S., it's around 43,000 employees out of that 75, so we're a large company here in the U.S., and 1,900 sites. Our materials and our products and our services are really we take an integrated approach and use our technologies used extensively throughout construction. What is unique about CRH in this sector is our ability to integrate design. We have materials, products, and engineering to enable the transition to a more sustainable and resilient built environment. Our portfolio includes a lot of the products that you heard some of my panelists to talk about. Aggregates and cement is a part of our portfolio. But we also have building and infrastructure solutions, as well as outdoor living solutions, and of course, road solutions, of which I'll be talking about the asphalt side of our business today. Our focus and our purpose really is to reinvent the way our world is built, and that's an integrated approach across our portfolio. We are a very proud partner to be partnered with NAPA as we address policy, investment, innovation, solutions in order to advance sustainability in the asphalt industry. CRH also has SBTI certified carbon reduction goals, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but we have targets out to 2030, which is absolute reduction of 30% of our CO2 emissions, and then we also have a net zero map also to 2050. So I look forward to the conversation.
Terrific. All right, let's start with cement. We'll lay the foundation. So we've got representatives here from Cemex and Holcim, and you guys are two of the first companies in the cement industry whose net zero roadmaps to 2050 have been validated by the Science Based Target Initiative, as has been previously mentioned. Your roadmaps are notable for committing to emissions reductions across the whole value chain, from energy procurement, to operations, to the actual products that you sell. So, at a high level, can you speak to the key levers in your roadmap and how you see different technologies being deployed from now to 2030 and to 2050? And, can you give us a little insight, like what are your plans? How do you get from here to there? Let's start with you, Melissa.
Thanks. And I was smiling back there in the green room while Undersecretary Crane was talking about the way that these plans run, right? We do efficiency, we do whatever, carbon capture and storage, and we plant trees. It's unfortunate but true, in a sense, because we know what we need to do. We need to be able to do it faster, right? So the levers are the ones that you know that they are, right? We need more renewable energy to address our Scope 2 emissions. We need carbon capture and storage. We need EVs. We're trying to move our fleet to 100% EVs. We put in an order for 200. Sorry if anyone from Ford is here. For 200 F-150 Lightnings last year, we received one. The plan is pretty clear. And I sit on the steering committee for the CCS project around St. Genevieve. That's our largest plant, the world's largest cement plant. It's in Missouri. Yesterday, and I was looking at the timeline, which happens to correspond pretty neatly with what Undersecretary Crane laid out, 2030s. And I asked the question about how much the timeline depends on funding and on technology availability. And the answer was completely, right? It depends completely. And so I think that the key levers are pretty clear, but it's more about the enabling conditions, right? If we can't get more transmission build, then we can't get more renewable energy. We have 13 cement plants and 0 pipelines right now to connect any captured CO2 to storage. We don't have Class 6 wells to store the carbon in. And so where we're really focused now is having later plans on trying to spur some of these enabling conditions so that we can do what we want to do as fast as possible.
I think that building that enabling infrastructure might end up being a common theme here. Jure, over to you.
Thank you. We have a roadmap for our 2030 goals, and it largely relies on alternative fuels, reducing our clinker factor, optimizing specific heat consumption, and that's in the cement facilities. looking at decarbonated raw materials and alternative raw materials. All of these things can be done. They're technically feasible, but some of them are not feasible as a practical matter or economically for each and every one of our operations. The cement plants that we have are spread out across 7 states, and some of them have greater proximity and availability to alternative fuels. For you who are not familiar with the, excuse me, the clinker manufacturing process, materials are put into a kiln and heated to very high temperatures and sustained at that temperature for 24/7. It does not shut down unless there's scheduled outages and minimal disruptions. With those alternative fuels, we can use different types of materials. Historically, the industry has relied on coal, pet coke, and excuse me, natural gas. A lot of our plants use alternative fuels. That is a common practice across the cement industry, but we are facing some challenges to be able to really open that lever up and fully convert. The U.S. is very far behind on that front, and our European counterparts, and in Germany, for example, has a 60% substitution rate. So mechanisms that will allow us to optimize that lever seems like a low-hanging fruit to a lot of people, but it isn't necessarily. There are the regulations around our waste management here in the U.S., but they're not necessarily cohesive at the federal level, and then you also have to deal with state and local issues. But some of those materials that we would like to be able to consume and recover energy from are different waste streams. That includes tire-derived fuels. We're also looking at renewable natural gas. There can be biomass, engineered municipal solid waste. There are a lot of waste streams that could be diverted with stronger policy incentives and regulations to divert some of these materials from going to a landfill where their embodied energy will be lost and they will eventually deteriorate and release emissions, often methane, which is more harmful than carbon. So we think that that is an area where we would really love to see some support from the policy level, more research and development as well. There's a lot of concern from some organizations and community members because they just don't understand it. So we think that government-funded domestic study into that lever could be helpful for the entire industry. Our goals for 2050, they do not rely on known, proven, scalable, economically viable technologies right now. We know we're going to have to rely on innovations that we haven't even conceived of yet, but also we're focusing heavily on CCUS. That will definitely close the gap as we reduce our actual emissions as much as we can. We know that we will need CCUS. For that reason, we are internalizing that expertise. We've hired a CCUS and hydrogen expert, and we will continue pursuing those opportunities.
Terrific. All right, foundation is laid. Let's get steel in the ground. Kevin, you've already told us that the U.S. steel and iron industry is the cleanest in the world. So 2 thumbs up to start off with. That's great. And Congress has actually been really productive in the past several years. We got the Energy Act of 2020, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, CHIPS and Science Act, we got tax incentives and the Inflation Reduction Act. We got the Super Act, which Rich already mentioned. And this legislation is faster than a speeding bullet, can leap tall buildings with a single bound, and decarbonize steel. How do these laws enable your industry to accelerate that decarbonization path, to continue leading the world? And what are the low emissions technologies that you're really focusing on?
Yeah, thanks, Stan. As my colleagues from the cement industry said, you know, there's a process that's going to have a number of different stages. You know, near term, with already having about 70% of our industry using electricity to produce steel, decarbonizing the electricity grid is really going to be a key step, can really reduce those Scope 2 emissions. So the incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act for continued investment in clean energy, whether it's wind, solar, we think nuclear is going to definitely be part of it. Those are all going to be really critical. So that's a critical first step. I also think that as we then try to tackle the more difficult issue of how do you decarbonize the iron making process, which is really, it's a matter of chemistry. Right now, you need the carbon to bind with the oxygen in iron oxide, in iron ore, to strip off the oxygen to give you the pure iron. So we need to figure out another way to do that that doesn't involve carbon. That's the really hard, tough nut to crack. In the near term, I think we're going to need a lot more carbon capture utilization, as well as storage, but I really think we need to focus more on carbon capture and utilization to help use the carbon that we are going to be emitting for some period of time, hopefully in lower and lower levels. But we're very focused on recycling everything that comes out of the steel mill, whether it's waste gases, whether it's the slag that is produced with steel that can be used in cement, or other processes. So I think that carbon capture utilization is key. But then in the long run, we need to solve that problem of substituting something for carbon. And that's where I think things like the Super Act that look at really developing strategies for true breakthrough technologies are going to be key. And there's already some money being put in through both the bipartisan infrastructure law with the hydrogen hubs initiative, as well as in the Inflation Reduction Act for industrial decarbonization, to really start to look at all of the options available. A lot evolve around hydrogen, but I'll be honest, I'm worried that so many industries are looking to use clean hydrogen in their decarbonization. I don't know that we can put all our money in there being enough hydrogen to solve the problem. So I think we need to be looking at a range of solutions, whether it's electrolysis, biomass, other options that could help the steel industry ultimately crack that tough nut of how do you get rid of carbon in the iron reduction process. And that's where we need the Super Act. We need government involved in helping to look at those really far out innovations, and how do we encourage continued research and development to help the industry crack that tough nut.
Terrific. All right. And lastly, asphalt. We can see if we can really hit the road running.
All right, thank you so much.
And from what I understand, and I'll leave it to you to explain, a lot of the emissions from asphalt come from bitumen. Apparently this is a word that you can pronounce multiple correct ways. I looked it up because I didn't know how to pronounce it. And that's like a small amount of the asphalt volume, but most of the emissions. Given that concentrated nature of emissions, what are the decarbonization levers that your industry is looking towards? And are there other benefits that this decarbonization pathway can help achieve?
Thank you so much. So all of my colleagues are really representing well the other side of my business, the cement side of the business. One of the biggest challenges we have for the asphalt industry is that a lot of effort is put into moving into lower emissions. It really revolves around technology. So you're talking about bitumen as one of them. Asphalt plants, to give you an example, is purchased once a generation because of the cost of permitting that is required to set one of the asphalt plants up. While there are some of the off-of-the-shelf, new plants in our country, there are other plants that need to be replaced or updated and provided with the latest of technology. In the Inflation Reduction Act, other industries such as steel and cement were given significant capital to help reduce emissions, but the bill was written in a way that does make it difficult for the asphalt industry to take advantage of some of the efforts. So, since the asphalt mix is the primary road surface in America, you may not know that it's around 95% of the market of the roads here in America. We feel the asphalt industry should be afforded every opportunity to take advantage of equal federal opportunities towards achieving net zero in concert with other materials in the road construction space. The asphalt industry is a movement towards performance-based mix designs, which could provide the opportunity for the industry to innovate and use new and novel technologies and lower carbon materials as well, which have not been readily accepted in this particular market to date. because performance-based systems would provide additional confidence of the mixture's performance. And, you know, one of the single most impactful policy changes and recommendations that we have will be for the asphalt mixture production industry to require an increase in amount of reclaimed asphalt pavement to be used in each of the tons of mix that is produced. Currently in the United States, you may not be aware that 21% recycled content is used, but our goal as an industry is to get to 40% recycled content by 2030. NAPA has been leading the way and paving the way for over 30 years in terms of recycling. And, you know, bitumen and other materials is going to be critical as we get into the next generation of asphalt paving.
All right. Now we're going to move to just questions generally for all of you. So feel free to jump in, be in conversation with each other, agree, disagree with each other. So we talked about a lot of the enabling legislation that has recently passed, the Energy Policy Act of 2020, the bipartisan infrastructure law, the tax package. What future policy support are you looking towards to accelerate your path to net zero? You want to, Kevin, first?
Sure, Zan. I'll say one thing that I think we still need that's going to be critical. For the steel industry, and I think for many industries in the U.S., we're investing a lot of money in decarbonization. The industries are, and U.S. industry is leading the world in terms of low carbon production today, and we're putting a significant additional money, $23 billion in the steel industry right now, in further investment. Our biggest threat to that continued progress is frankly the threat of imports of high emitting but very cheap imports from abroad that could undermine the industry while we're making the significant investments. So we do think that some type of trade policy that takes carbon intensity into account, that would establish a border fee that is based on the differential between the carbon intensity of domestic products and imported products, would help ensure that the U.S. industry is not undercut as it invests by the dumping of cheap but dirty steel, for example. So we think that's a critical component we just need.
There's a lot of growing interest in that policy, bipartisan interest in a border carbon fee, a foreign pollution fee. I think that's a really exciting space that people should be looking at. Melissa?
I just wanted to echo the point. Thank you for raising it. Our customer base, you know, and this is going to be true, I think, for all of us, they buy a commodity product, right? And so basically customers shop on price. And so if we are being responsible about our carbon emissions and that has some price premium, we're going to be undercut by foreign competition. And under that scenario, pollution is a competitive advantage. It just shouldn't be. And so we wholeheartedly agree, some kind of border adjustment fee, obviously WTO compliant, but we need some kind of protection against carbon leakage if we're really going to tackle this issue.
I like it. Invest locally, think globally.
I would like to add, echoing their comments, we believe that that type of mechanism is at the federal level, because there are different areas that have their own cap and trade systems in the U.S., and there's also the risk of leakage within the United States. And for those companies that operate in multiple states, you could find yourself in a regulatory patchwork, which makes it a even more challenging environment to operate in. So I believe that it is very important for us to recognize that risk for us. I believe that the IRA is, in a sense, a price on carbon, and it's going to run out in 12 years as it's currently drafted. And this effort for CCUS and all the other investments that we're making across the industries are going to outlive that. And if we make all of those investments and then we don't continue to have that type of support going forward, it could also undercut those companies that have invested.
And you're talking about the 45Q tax credit for capturing carbon?
Yes, and utilization as well.
Great.
If I could, just make a comment on something you said earlier in terms of, we're global companies, but we have to act local. And in the asphalt industry, I want to kind of give you a bit of a perspective of the makeup of the U.S. here. And this is what makes the decarbonization challenge quite significant for the industry, because the products are very local in nature. There's an asphalt plant in every congressional district in the United States. Decarbonization of asphalt pavement in Arizona will take a different strategy in terms of decarbonization than Louisiana. And just to give you an example, in Arizona, the state agency requires 100% hydrated lime in asphalt mixtures to prevent moisture damage. So I'm gonna give you a different example. But this adds up to 20% emissions to a ton of asphalt mix. Now, in order for asphalt to decarbonize in this location, there has to be substitutes for lime, and it has to be considered. But shifting to parts of Louisiana, lime is not required, but there is not locally available aggregate, and aggregate transportation can account for 40 to 50%. So you'll have a very different mix of products that's available from one part of the country to another part of the country. And so when we think about the strategy for decarbonization, a national strategy can be very difficult as we try to nail down the process to getting there. However, policy does need to play its part in local agencies in order for us to address specifications, standards, and they have to meet the local challenges where they are as we tackle these challenges. So, I've heard my colleagues talk about the major federal policies, and we also have to think about the local policies that enable us to address the challenges where and meet our customers where they are.
Thanks. We talked a lot about policy. Let's talk a little bit about innovation. What know-how, technological capability, capacity, infrastructure do we have now versus where do we need innovation to move to the next level? What are you thinking on in terms of innovation, both on terms of like where your industry is investing, and also around federal incentives or policies that support innovation? Jeray?
I believe something that could be innovative is changing the approach to how we build things and how we design them. It's not necessarily a technical innovation, but it is product innovation. And I mentioned clinker factor earlier and how we want to lower that. And one way to do that, that's reducing the amount of clinker that goes into the same amount of cement. And you can do that by blending the materials with other sources, and that lowers the intensity. But when you look at embodied carbon for our industries, you need to look at the entire life cycle of the product and how it is utilized, because there are opportunities to re-envision it. We need the design community to embrace lower carbon products. We need them to consider how to build and design the entire project so that over the life cycle of it, through its use phase, not just its initial construction, that it is optimized to reduce emissions. And we've seen some procurement policies at the federal level, and we're encouraged by that. But I do think that just an innovative approach to how we design and specify materials could be very impactful.
Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, just to build on that, because recycling of steel scrap is a key part of our decarbonization strategy. The big limitation right now is that when you take a car and you crush it down and you melt it down, while it's mostly steel, you have trace elements of other metals, for instance, copper. If you have too much copper in your steel mix, it makes the resulting steel brittle, hard to mold for building a car. So figuring out a way to encourage continued recycling, but to better separate out the various metals in the recycling process, either through better design of products at the beginning so that they're easier to break down and recycle, or other better technologies for sorting and separating different waste streams to pull out and to get for what in steel, what's the highest value is what we call prime scrap. The scrap that is basically still pure steel that was just left over from, say, stamping an auto body. How do we innovate our recycling system in the United States to give us more prime scrap, because that reduces the amount of new iron ore we have to produce and deal with that other carbon problem.
I would just,
Melissa and then Eunice.
oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Oh, that's good, yeah. So let me just switch for a moment and talk about the balanced mix design change that needs to happen for the asphalt market. So just to give you an example, an asphalt contractor can choose how to run their asphalt plant to some extent, but a lot of the control is really achieved related to low carbon, falls in the hands of the roadway owners as well as in the specifiers. And those specifiers will be state DOTs who are asked with implementing the roadway projects. Now, many of the specifiers will specify material quality, recipes, temperature to run the asphalt plant, and mixture contents for the aggregates. Now, all of which can impact emissions. Now, if roadway owners, state DOTs, would press towards more performance-based, or as we call it in the asphalt industry, a balanced mix design, then we would have more resilient recipes, and we would focus holistically on our environmental as well as economic and engineering performance of the paving industry. Now, owners will no longer have to specify, and the contractor will have made the mix. They could just focus on how the mix performs actually in the application, and the contractor could use more recycled material, more locally available material. You heard us talking about recycling a lot up here. But for this to happen, specifications must be reconsidered, specifications must be reevaluated, and the owners must be willing to really trust and allow the contractors to make the mix and the test to demonstrate that the mix actually shows as it is designed to be performed. And once for the asphalt industry, once we actually evolve to this level of process and implementation change, and this is a part of innovation, then we'll actually see asphalt in a more performance-based design versus the way pavement is designed today.
Terrific. Melissa, you're going to get the last word, and then we're going to wrap the panel.
Thanks, Eunice. You covered it really well. I just wanted to bridge between your comments and Sheree's that having a better focus on materials performance married with the procurement guidelines, right? I mean, that's where the rubber meets the road.
That's exactly.
Gosh, you're infectious.
You're doing great. Yeah.
Unbelievable. Right, thank you. I'll wrap with that.
All right, a couple of laughs, several decarbonization technology strategies. Thank you so much for being here. I'm full of optimism. I think that American industry can lead on this front, that we can achieve our goals, that the policy tools that Congress has already passed are a great starting point, and that we can do more, and that we will do more, and look forward to going on this journey with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, folks should help yourselves to coffee, and we're just going to keep on rolling through the conversation. That was my bad attempt at like a road adjacent pun. Road adjacent, okay. But some of the largest emitters in the industrial subsectors with such clear, coherent plans for decarbonizing and such amazing commitments from their industries is really, really inspiring to see. So let me just say thank you again to CEMEX, Wholesome, AISI, CRH, and BPC for some really interesting insights and for sending fantastic folks here to discuss this with us. So the biggest takeaway for me from that conversation was in the broad range of solutions that we need. Everything from clean electricity to decarbonize that portion of the iron and steel sector that relies on electricity for recycling and electric arcs, to lower carbon asphalt solutions in places that don't currently have a lot of asphalt or aggregate to supply the asphalt. So we really need a broad range of solutions for all of this. So next, I am very pleased to introduce a true champion in Congress, the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee Ranking Member Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia. As the top Republican on the EPW committee, Ranking Member Capito has worked to promote common sense regulatory strategy, protect affordable, reliable energy production, build our nation's infrastructure, and encourage economic development. Senator Capito was also elected by her colleagues to serve as vice chair of the Senate Republican Conference. Please welcome Ranking Member Shelley Moore Capito.
Thank you. Wow, I've never walked into the room while I'm getting introduced. This is great. Good morning, everybody. Nice to see so many of you here, and I think it's a beautiful venue. I've actually been here a couple times. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the ClearPath team, all the things that you're doing and the conversations that have begun. Ooh, oops, I think I just broke this. I'm a lot shorter than most people. And thank all of you for what you're doing and what you're going to do in the future. I think this is an important time to bring everybody together to talk about emissions and environment and make these solutions bipartisan solutions, because they're the most long-lasting solutions, but they're also the ones that have the greatest likelihood of actually seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, which is difficult in the political environment that we're in right now. But I think the bipartisan infrastructure package, if anything, is a great example of how in our committee, in EPW, if we sit down and do the work at the granular level with our ideas, my ideas, on the Republican side, and my team and my other members, Senator Carper and his team and his other members, we can actually reach bipartisan solutions that then become very strong. And that's what happened in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. On the highway bill, the highway and bridge bill, we actually passed that unanimously out of our committee and it became really that, and the wastewater and drinking water bill, which we also passed unanimously out of committee, became really the greatest bulwark of that infrastructure package. And so I'm proud of the work that we're doing. We're working on some other things like PFAS, very controversial issues in some sense, recycling, not so controversial, and other issues that I think can bring us together. And so I look forward to us having some successes with that. I am from the state of West Virginia, a very heavily energy state, one I'm obviously exceedingly proud of. So I'm going to kind of go back to some of our past in our state to an understanding of where the mindset maybe of somebody like me might be. For centuries, the Mountain State, we led in steel and cement and our mining industries. So we really powered the country early in the 1900s and into the Industrial Revolution to provide cheap, affordable energy to be able to power this nation to what we see now as the powerful nation that we have. We had a very brisk iron industry in our Eastern Panhandle. We had a huge steel industry, and those of you who are familiar with the Pittsburgh area know of Wheeling Pittsburgh Steel and the steel industry that went up through the Ohio River there that has changed a lot. And then we also were the very first petrochemical industry began in our state. We were the first facility to manufacture one of the major building blocks of chemicals, which is ethylene, in West Virginia. So we have an abundant natural gas, which is one of the reasons that we've kind of placed in this. We did a lot of the ammunitions during World War II. So we have a big and broad history of heavy industry, of successful industry, and the industries that have been the building blocks of the strength of our country. So as we look to, and this is a big topic of conversation in Congress, is bringing back those jobs and having that industrial base and manufacturing base back in this country that over the years has creeped out over into beyond our shores. You hear Buy America, Build America in a lot of these programs, in the CHIPS program, in some of the infrastructure programs. If you don't have the basic building blocks to actually manufacture and build in America, you can't buy American. And so a lot of folks are looking for exemptions and trying to figure out how they can move forward with their projects with these requirements. And I'm a fan of Buy America, but we have to make it so it actually works. And so I think that's one of the really important building blocks of what we're working on now. In West Virginia, back to West Virginia again, we've had a couple really interesting and exciting economic developments. We have Nucor is going to build their newest steel production company along the Ohio River in West Virginia. It's going to be state-of-the-art. It's probably going to have a lot of the technologies that ClearPath and others are looking at for industrial resources in terms of capturing emissions, recycling materials, and making sure that it's the cleanest and greenest it can be. It's going to be a massive investment, and the exciting thing for me is that it's right along a portion of our state on the Ohio River that has had huge downturns in the economy and hasn't really been able to break through. This is going to be a massive, everybody uses the name game changer, but a massive game changer in that region of our state, and it's very, very exciting. I'll kind of go off to the side here and say the permitting issues that they are facing, that all of you have faced if you're trying to permit in your particular businesses, are a huge problem and a huge stumbling block to be able to get these projects all the way across the line. So if we're going to go clean and we're going to go green and we're going to make it in our industrial sources as clean as we can, we have to get the permitting right. We have to get it reasonable, and it has to be able to. Thank you. So we took a swat at the ball in the debt limit bill. I'm still pushing for this, talking to Senator Carper a lot. Energy Committee's pushing for this as well. We want to see that we do that right. We also have another announcement that was interesting. It's a Berkshire Hathaway investment, again along the Ohio River in an old industrial site. And this one is going to be a titanium melting company that's owned by Berkshire Hathaway, is going to locate there, but it is going to be it's going to be a totally enclosed system. It's going to be powered by solar panels. And so the whole running of the company and everything there will be run on this solar panels. And there again, it will be, I think, state-of-the-art in terms of environment and also in terms of emission controls, and also a game changer, again, for a region that was a big aluminum producing area. We still have Constellium right next door, so there's really good synergies there. But with the location of this new plant here, with the innovation that they have with it, is, I think, an exciting thing for a region of our state that really has needed and does need the expansion. So these are all good things. I talked about IIJA and how we worked on making sure that our new transportation sectors and our new water sectors and all the broadband and others that are included in this have the aspect of environmental concern and environmental compassion to make sure that we're building with resiliency, that we're using smart materials, and that we're doing it for the longevity, in our best interest. So we had to make some compromises there, and so I'm proud of that work. A lot of that's getting rolled out now, but we've learned that if we don't repair and maintain and keep our vital transportation corridors open, again, we're falling behind, and we can see deteriorations in some of our bridges and other things, which obviously concrete, cement, steel, these are all materials that are absolutely essential to keeping our infrastructure in the modern state that we want it to be in. In 2019, I led the effort, I think, with Senator Whitehouse for the Clean Industrial Technology Act, which is to asking the Department of Energy to put together pilot studies where industrial sources are able to be incentivized to do carbon capture and utilization to lower emissions, and to put kind of foot on the scale for that kind of technologies in that industrial sector. My understanding is that the Department of Energy has set the program up, and you all can probably tell me, maybe you will tell me here shortly, whether they've actually, moved all the way forward in this. We did put, I think, $500 million into this program and the IIJA, so we're waiting to see that all roll out. Lastly, in the NDAA, which we are dealing with as we speak, on the Senate floor, we are confident, but not 100% assured, because nothing's assured until you actually see it, that the ADVANCE Act, which is our latest nuclear bill, has a good chance of getting onto that and riding on the NDAA. Again, another bipartisan effort. Nuclear has great potential, I think, throughout the country to be cleaner and greener in all aspects, whether it's industrial, whether it's power generation, and other aspects. We've let our nuclear systems and our appetite for nuclear really wane. We've changed it now in the power sector to small modulars. You see some development at former coal sites where the transmission's there, and putting in smaller nuclear plants for power generation. Certainly, I think, as, for instance, our state had a prohibition on nuclear. We're a big coal state, you all know that. And we had a prohibition on nuclear. Well, 2 years ago, the legislature removed that prohibition and actually built in some incentives to bring nuclear into our state. And we're having a good look at that from, in the power sector, from those abandoned coal generation units that now, and they're doing one in Wyoming as we speak, the use that they could be, or the reuse that we see on that. So this would be investment, and it would strengthen our leadership abroad. We do feel strongly in the committee when we pass the bill that we have to be the leaders here in nuclear technologies. We don't want somebody else like China taking over the superiority of the nuclear technologies where everybody's looking to them to build and to innovate and to use either in the industrial sector or the power sector or wherever. We want to be the leader there. And so we are going to be encouraging the completion of having this bill across the table, and then incentivizing or watching the NRC move forward with the licensure and other things that have been sort of stagnated as they've tried to move through the process. I guess if there's a tie-in to any part of the story, it's the slow movement of the bureaucracies of government that's slow up the innovation that I think we all desperately need. So I want to, my point in bringing forward sort of the tale in the short way of our state of West Virginia, is to say that we all want to be at the table. We want to be at the table to make good, common sense adjustments and where we need to incentivize innovation where we have to lead the world in the global competitiveness, and to kind of not get in our own way sometimes of making sure that we're the ones that are going to not just do our share in the environmental space, but do better than our share in the environmental space and be a leader in all aspects of industry, of government, and of just our general public's view of how we can make our beautiful country even better. So with that, I'll say thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here.
I do. We could actually ask you a
Okay.
question.
Okay, sure.
You talked a lot about the incredibly important role of permitting reform,
Right.
in building anything in this country at this point. What do you think the prospects are at this point for a significant, obviously bipartisan deal on
Right.
permitting reform to get things moving faster?
Well, permitting, I would say 6 months ago, permitting was really front and center for a lot of aspects. I had the MVP pipeline coming through our state with obviously other senators, and this was an important portion of permitting reform and a very frustrating portion of that. So taking that out of the mixture, which is out of the mixture. in the debt limit bill, so let me back up. When it failed in September, that portion of permitting failed in September, Senator Manchin's permitting bill. We then gathered together a group of 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats, with me being the lead, Senator Manchin being the lead on the Democrat side, and tried to see where our fall points are, or, you have just like in any negotiation, big wish list of what would be great, and then they brought, the Democrats bring their big wish list. So we knew where our difficult points were going to be. And then when the debt limit negotiations came on, it was interesting to me to see that a lot of those points, mine was it has to be agnostic as to whatever your energy production is, or whatever you're doing. If it's renewables, if it's fossil, it has to be treated the same in the permitting process. You can't put your foot on the scale for one industry over another. That the debt limit met that. The other thing is that it had to have some NEPA reform because it's such a slow process. So timelines. So we were able to get that. The one thing that didn't make it in there, that was one of my pillars, is some judicial reform, meaning you can have your judicial, you can have your appeals, and you can fight, as you see, is fought all the time through the court systems, but at some point it's got to end. It's got to end, because you see these things going on 6 and 7 years. And I'll use the MVP pipeline as an example. It had been in court 9 times. It had been favorably dispositioned only once, 8 times, turned back, and very, very frustrating over 5 or 7 years. So, but rolling with the punches. But on the other side, what was also not in there was any kind of transmission. And if you're going back again to the power sector, if you're going to cite windmills, if you're going to cite solar panels or whatever kind of renewables, or a new natural gas plant in a new area, you have to have transmission, and you have to have the permitting for that. So those are the 2 things that are still left out, major things that are still left out, that I think could be the basis of a bipartisan product. The problem is the wind is sort of out of the sails. So for those of you, since that was my only applause line, then I would encourage you to keep talking about this, because it could have the effect of fading away if we don't keep the intensity going. Now, there is a bit of a discussion over the CHIPS bill, because here again, you want to have CHIPS manufacturing facilities. You can't get them sited, you can't get them permitted, and there's a desire to accelerate that, and so we'll see where that goes as an amendment to some other bills. So that is still talking. My issue with that is small bites at the apple are never going to get us to really the main issues, which are all of the timelines, how long it takes, how much repetitiveness. We have one federal decision. We did get that in the debt limit, which means it all has to feed through one particular agency, which makes a whole lot of sense. But how is it implemented? How do the regulators actually make sure that this is what occurs? So that is yet to be seen. So I'm optimistic on permitting reform, but I do think that the intensity needs to come from those who know it best, which are those who are writing and trying to figure out how to get the permits. And so it's still very, very difficult and time-consuming and expensive.
Well, Senator, we have been so lucky. You've been so generous with your time, and we are so lucky to have your leadership on these issues in the Senate. So thank you very much. Let's give a warm round of thanks to Senator.
Yes, thanks. All right. Have a good day.
Thanks
Thank
again
you.
so much. You know, as we think about the last decade of especially significant bipartisan progress on clean energy and energy innovation issues, Ranking Member Capito has really been in the middle of all those things. And I'm particularly excited that she mentioned the ADVANCE Act, which would help us streamline the process for new nuclear technologies. We're actually going to hear in a couple of conversations the role that advanced high-temperature nuclear could also play as part of this conversation. So also good news, Ranking Member Capito is now the only elected official involved in this conversation, and so we now have some remarks coming in to us on video from two other senators. First, Senator Chris Coons from the great state of Delaware, and then Senator Thom Tillis from ClearPath's home state, the great state of North Carolina. So we'll welcome them now both by video.
Hi, I'm U.S. Senator Chris Coons from Delaware. It's my honor to join ClearPath, the Clean Air Task Force, other industry leaders, my Senate colleagues, and all of you at the Clean Industrial Technology Summit. In Congress, we've made significant investments through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act to both tackle climate change, achieve economy-wide decarbonization, and drive innovation that will help to continue growing our economy and opportunity for the coming generation of Americans. Right now, our administration is focused on implementation of these big laws, and we are seeing cleaner energy projects and new infrastructure investments emerge in every state across our country, both red and blue, as a result. A piece of the bipartisan infrastructure law is the SCALE Act, which I led with Republican Senator Bill Cassidy. The Department of Energy has established a $2 billion program to provide financial incentives to develop CO2 transport and storage infrastructure. This will help ensure that we can get carbon dioxide from where it's captured or removed to where it can be utilized or safely stored underground. There's also now coming forward new investments needed for clean hydrogen, which received a huge funding boost through both the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Hydrogen is especially good for decarbonizing sectors that are difficult to electrify, like shipping and the manufacturing of steel, cement, or glass. Green hydrogen will help reduce pollution in communities, create high-quality jobs, and ensure energy security into the future. There is a competition underway right now to secure one of the hydrogen hubs across the U.S., an $8 billion program that will spur hydrogen development, connect producers with end users, and start the build-out of a national clean hydrogen network. There's a big demand for this program. There were nearly 80 concept papers submitted. About 33 were encouraged to move forward, and ultimately 6 to 10 hubs will be selected. And it's my hope that one of them will be in the Mid-Atlantic. I serve as the co-chair of the Bipartisan Senate Climate Solutions Caucus, and I think there's no shortage of opportunities for bipartisan cooperation. And there's a path forward to keep building momentum for decarbonization policies. There's so much left to do, and I'm excited to build on and complement these landmark investments I've been describing with new legislation. I've been working with Senator John Cornyn of Texas on a package of 4 hydrogen bills, the Hydrogen Infrastructure Initiative, to fill gaps in our current investments, demand-side incentives to support hydrogen uptake in key sectors like steel and cement manufacturing, maritime, and long-haul trucking, plus the build-out of the infrastructure to transport and store hydrogen at scale. I'm also excited about the possibility of our using trade tools to address climate change, an emerging area of bipartisan cooperation. With Senator Kevin Cramer of North Dakota, I recently introduced the Prove It Act to direct the Department of Energy to study the emissions intensity of both domestically manufactured products compared to those of our allies and competitors. And we are building out bipartisan support for this bill. The core goal, we can't mitigate what we haven't measured. The bill will shine a light on countries with lax environmental standards so we can hold them accountable and put tariffs on their emissions-intensive products that they're trying to send into the American market. I'm excited about other decarbonization opportunities in concrete, cement, and asphalt. Concrete is the world's most widely used building material. There were 18 billion tons of concrete produced globally last year. And I'm working to gather bipartisan support for policies that would support the research and development, demonstration, and adoption of low-carbon concrete mixtures, including performance-based incentives. So, in conclusion, there are opportunities, even in a partisan and divided Congress, and we have to take advantage of them to keep hearing each other, respecting each other, legislating, and moving forward. I want to thank the Clean Air Task Force and ClearPath for your leadership in this critical space. And I also want to thank my energy and climate policy lead, Dr. Lizzie Hunsaker, for her great work on these issues. I look forward to working with you to fight climate change, decarbonize our industrial sector, and continue to drive innovation. I am convinced that with your partnership and leadership, and with our bipartisan work in Congress, the United States and our economy will be positioned to lead the world in these critical efforts. Thank you. Hi, I'm U.S. Senator Chris Coons.
Hi, I'm Thom Tillis, Senator from the great state of North Carolina. Thank you for inviting me to share a few remarks today. I am excited to see such a broad group of NGOs, industrial leaders, and innovators coming together to talk about how we can maintain America's competitive advantage in the industrial sector and return manufacturing to the United States. While the United States has the cleanest technology and industrial processes in the world, the developing world is building rapidly and looking for affordable industrial processes. The United States needs continued innovation to maintain a competitive advantage. Targeted public and private sector support for emerging technologies will be necessary to help the United States industry meet these goals and lead the world in low emissions technological innovation. If successful, I think we have an ability to lead the industries of steel, cement, concrete, asphalt, and chemicals because of the amazing innovations that are happening around the United States. Allowing America to lead will result in cleaner environment with massive reductions in global emissions and costs, as well as a healthy economy. North Carolina companies like Nucor have proudly led the way as America's best innovators. The industrial sector is set to be the top source of emissions by 2030, surpassing the power and transportation sectors. One of the biggest global environmental policies we can all get behind is bringing more manufacturing and more energy production back to the United States because of our environmental standards being the envy among the world. There are exciting new industrial R&D developments happening, and breakthrough technologies are being developed in the private sector to help put us on the path to bring more manufacturing back to the United States. My office and I want to continue to partner with you all on policies that can work to accelerate innovation in the United States to keep pace and ensure we are researching and deploying cutting-edge technologies to maximize America's advantage. And before I finish, I want to send a special thanks out to Jay Faison. We appreciate your vision, we appreciate your leadership, and I hope you have a great conference. Hi, I'm Thom Tillis.
Well, I think it is fair to say after that we have a terrific, powerful set of bipartisan policymakers focused on this area. Very exciting to see and hear. Now, earlier in this discussion, we heard a lot about how we have so many of the tools and technologies already to bring down the emissions of this sector. But we did hear also that there are parts of this we just don't know how to decarbonize. And so we're left with, well, we're going to plant a lot of trees, or we're going to invent something new. And so in this next session, we're going to hear from breakthrough technology developers about those new inventions, profoundly new and different ways to make steel, concrete, asphalt, cement, chemicals in ways that produce far fewer or even no greenhouse gas emissions in the first place. So very, very exciting set of companies here. And to lead that discussion very ably, I'm happy to announce the moderator of that discussion, Brad Townsend, the Vice President for Policy and Outreach at the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, which you may know as C2ES here in DC. So let's welcome them all to the stage.
Good morning, everybody. I feel obliged to start with a little bit of bad news, which is that I'm not nearly as funny as Zan is. So we're gonna have to lower expectations a little bit. I did have a joke planned, but I didn't know he was gonna steal it. That's it, I promise. That's all I got. So Thanks everybody for being here, and thank you to ClearPath and Clean Air Task Force for the opportunity. We're all here, as I think Lindsay mentioned in the opening, because we recognize the challenge, the need, and the opportunity to decarbonize the industrial sector. The challenge, of course, is multifaceted. Direct emissions from the industrial sector account for almost a quarter of US emissions, with energy used to produce industrial heat comprising about half of those emissions, or about 9% of total US emissions. Indirect emissions from electricity production are obviously also an important component, but the other half of that equation, the process emissions, are also going to be really critical to being able to address decarbonization in the industrial sector. The need is also clear. The urgency of decarbonizing industry to help address climate change is increasingly apparent as record heat and other climate impacts continue to dominate headlines both at home and abroad. But there's another component of that need that's worth considering as the carbon content of goods becomes an increasing focus of international trade discussions, which we already heard about a little bit on the previous panel, as well as the focus of investors. The competitiveness of domestic industries and the jobs they represent warrant approaching this issue with seriousness and a clarity of purpose. That, of course, is going to require innovation in the production process itself, and in some cases, capturing carbon and putting it to use by creating other products from those waste streams, which brings me to the opportunity. The United States has a legacy of bringing innovative technologies to the world, and that legacy today is being carried by a number of innovators who are helping to not only address the challenge of decarbonizing the industrial sector, but also ensuring that innovation, which has long been an engine of economic growth for the United States, continues to be a driver of prosperity in a global economy that is increasingly accelerating its transition to a low-carbon future. Of course, policy is playing a really important role in that transition, including key provisions from recent legislation, which we discussed a bit during the earlier panel, that's really supporting innovators here at home. But there's more to do. Supporting additional RD&D, for those innovation fans out there, make sure we get all those Ds in there, and mechanisms that support the germination of technologies and markets at home that can expand to global markets as well. For example, a recently announced pilot for the procurement of low-carbon construction materials from GSA. And so to explore these important issues, I'm pleased to be joined by a really remarkable panel of innovators who are all helping to lead the way in addressing the challenge of industrial decarbonization through innovation. So I'm joined by Leah Ellis, CEO at Sublime Systems, Leah Ellis at Sublime Systems, Cody Finke, who's the CEO of Brimstone, and Tom Dower, who's Vice President for Public Policy at Lanza Tech. So we'll go down the line. Leah, I will get that right. If you would like to kick us off.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Leah. I have a PhD in electrochemistry, so I'm a chemist by training. I previously worked with Tesla developing IP to make their batteries last longer and be more energy dense. In 2018, I moved to the States and came to MIT where I met my co-founder, and we decided to use our background in electrochemistry to develop what we call the electric vehicle of cement making. So what Sublime Systems does is we replace the cement kiln, which is a very high temperature fossil fuel combustion-driven process for making cement. It's part of why cement is so CO2 intensive, and we replace that with an ambient temperature electrochemical process that avoids all fossil fuel emissions and also CO2 emissions from the mineral itself, so the limestone that breaks down to make cement. So we spun out of MIT in March 2020, right as the world was falling apart with COVID, and since then we've really been focused on scale. I think we know that that's how you measure your impact is in the amount of cement we produce, and so since then we've piloted our system, are developing plans to bring this to the tens of thousands of tons per year scale in the coming years.
Great, thanks, Leah. Cody.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm Cody Finke. I'm co-founder and CEO of Brimstone. A bit about my personal background, I'm also a chemist. got a PhD at Caltech in environmental science and engineering, or engineering and applied science. And then moved to a DOE facility up in Northern California at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, where we spun out Brimstone. So Brimstone's working on decarbonizing cement, and at Brimstone we believe that three things need to be true for that to happen. The first of those things is you need to make the exact same material. And the reason we say that is because in order to decarbonize cement, you're going to need to use, or you need to scale quickly. And to scale quickly, right, you need to use the existing infrastructure that exists out there. You need to use the existing trade unions and builders who know how to build the material. And you also need to be able to specify the material in a way that's trusted by the industry. So that's the first thing. The second thing we believe needs to be true is it needs to be cost parity or better. Right? So we don't think that technology is going to scale globally fast enough if it's not cost parity or better. And the third thing that we believe needs to be true is it has to be lower emissions, or ideally carbon negative. And that's sort of, by definition, that's the case. But it's important with the cost parity or better piece because there are many places in the world where clean energy has not yet been deployed. We heard on some of the other panels that deployment of these sort of clean energy systems is taking some time. We want to make sure that the technology is substantially lower carbon or even carbon negative, even where clean energy has not yet come to speed, such that when it comes up to speed, it can be even better, but we do not have to wait for that. We can start decarbonizing immediately. So at Brimstone, what we do is we start with a new raw material that does not have any CO2 in it, unlike the conventional raw material, which is full of CO2. And we produce ordinary Portland cement from that material via a novel process. And just actually last week, we had a third party certify that our process can make the exact same material. So we have officially invented the third process in history that can make ordinary Portland cement. And this is, allow us to scale without the CO2. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Cody. Thom.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks for the invitation to be here. Thanks to ClearPath and to Clean Air Task Force for hosting this event. For me, this is very exciting because I've been in the policy world for a long time and I've been in the industrial world for a long time, and to see this audience and to know the interest that's grown over this topic is really actually very exciting personally for me. I'm a political scientist by training, not a chemist, so that makes me fit in pretty well in Washington, D.C. But I work for an amazing company full of scientists and engineers, and that's what I'm excited to talk about today. So I'm Vice President of Public Policy for LanzaTech. We are a US-based company, and we are a carbon recycling company. So we are taking waste carbon, feeding it through a biological process to make the goods, the products, the fuels, the chemicals that society needs every day and people use in their everyday lives. But we're doing it in a low carbon way, and really replacing current linear fossil-based supply chains with the circular economy that has been so long promised. And so we're really excited to bring this technology to the world. We're based in Skokie, Illinois, just north of Chicago, and yet we have projects all over the world to really help decarbonize the hardest to abate sectors. That's really where our focus is. We've started in steel and ferroalloys, in chemical refineries, et cetera. So really happy to talk more about how the technology works, but we really have to get the market, the policy, and the technologies all to work together in order to bring the net zero economy that we're all striving towards. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Thom, and thanks everybody for providing a little bit of opening context for the innovations that your companies are working on. I think that position in the market as an innovator offers a really valuable and unique perspective to this conversation, and in the context of the competitiveness of US industry, which we talked about a little bit earlier this morning. I'd like to maybe start with a question to everyone about how well positioned the US really is to be a leader and a home for innovators, and are there things that we could be doing better to improve that position globally?
Should I start? Well, I can speak to this as a Canadian. So the reason I came to the States is because the States is really the fast lane The people here are bold, they're brave, and they take initiative, whether that means, kicking the Brits out or whether that means like going to the moon. Like, Americans do things with high conviction. Like, they're smart and they're hardworking and they're passionate. And that's why, I abandoned my right to free healthcare, which I did enjoy. And I came to the States because it's all about the journey. And so I love working with the brightest, kindest, most driven people. And that's what I think, is the strength of the States. I think we're profoundly innovative. I am a dual citizen, by the way, so I am speaking with both citizenships. So we're profoundly innovative, and I think, like you said, innovation has been the driving engine for the US economy for many years, and you can see that with the software industry. We've exported a tremendous amount of innovation globally, and I think we have to keep that going. Like, why stop now? So I think we see that the climate challenge is very scary. I think, not enough people talk about how, well, maybe it's not nice to talk about how worrisome it is, but the truth is, it's in the news every day. There is a social cost of carbon, and that's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for us to really put the best minds together to bridge that gap and to deploy this quickly and just export something that can literally save the world.
I think that's really excellent. I think there's something that you said really struck me, which is that the perspective of an innovator of turning a problem into an opportunity, I think is really well said. Cody or Tom?
Yeah. So first of all, recent legislation that has given a lot of incentives for development and paying for infrastructure has, been a huge incentive to the clean tech industry, which I think is making the U.S. a home for clean tech development, which is really, really exciting. That being said, we need to be really sure that we are financing technologies, both a wide variety of technologies, which is why I'm glad that I'm sitting here on the stage with other folks working on the same problem, but also financing technologies that will be lower cost than the conventional production routes at scale. Because if not, they probably will not scale beyond US shores. And we want to make sure the technologies we're developing will decarbonize the world globally, because we all share one atmosphere. And also, we want to make sure that we can make US industries that also scale globally. There's no major multinational cement company that is a US-owned cement company, right? So this is a concern that I think that a lot of folks in this country would want to address. And I think that, recent legislation has gone a long way, but we just want to make sure that that legislation goes to making things that are lower cost at scale.
So I would add that the U.S. innovation infrastructure, the history of innovation in the U.S. and technology development, is unsurpassed in the world, and we should be very proud of that. But at the same time, I think we got away from understanding the connection of that to manufacturing and the importance of actually making things, because that is where the innovation actually happens so often. And one of the concerns I've had is that the Department of Energy or other US agencies very focused and so well focused with the national labs and other entities around the country on early stage R&D. But taking that early stage R&D and adding the other Ds to RD, D, and D is so important. And that's where you can then have the synergy between the innovation, the science, and the technology and real world application and really making it work. And so, it's wonderful to have academic papers and have these breakthroughs, but if they just sit on a shelf and they don't actually help humanity solve its very difficult problems, then they haven't fulfilled their mission. And that's what scientists want to do, right? And that's what innovators want to do. So that's what we're laser focused on, is really helping getting over not just the so-called valley of death of taking startups to full scale, to taking technologies to full scale, but multiple valleys of death. And many of them start as technical and scientific, and those are the ones you either get over early or you fail, but then we have to get over the others. And so I think the US is really well situated with the current investment structures that have been put in place, additional policies that I think would be helpful, some of which were discussed earlier in the earlier panels, but then really connecting that with the private sector investments that are happening and need to happen. And to the price parity point that Cody has made, the fact is the U.S. does not have a price on carbon, and that makes the U.S. Innovation through manufacturing and deployment different and perhaps more complicated than in places where there's a price on carbon, and that automatically then incentivizes the deployment of low carbon technology. So I do think we have a unique case here, but we also have an incredible history in the United States of leading on innovation, and we should take advantage of all of those things, in addition to our abundant resources and this incredible geographic place that we live, which with such diversity, not only of people, but of geography, and our ability to really be that beacon for the world. I mean, I have heard from many people in my years when I worked in the U.S. Senate, for example, from other countries, really looking to the U.S. for leadership, and I think this is our moment to actually lead.
May I pipe up with a question? This is the first time I'm hearing R&D and D, and I just want to confirm that's research, development, and deployment. Is that right?
And demonstration as well.
Oh, is that a fourth D?
That's the third D.
Deployment and demonstration.
Yeah,
okay.
it's technically the third D, but.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's very much right. And I'm speaking as a scientist, and I know that the U.S. also, funds a lot of scientific research, and Sublime has been the recipient of 2 ARPA-E grants, which is fantastic. But the science is interesting, but you're still in an ivory tower. You're not actually doing anything, and frankly, you're not very inspiring or motivating to young people unless you're actually getting shit done. And so I think that those extra D's on the end are really important.
Yeah. And I also love the message, and I think that's a headline for today's event, is get shit done, right? I think that's a really great takeaway. So I think to just sort of reflect back and summarize, and I think we're going to revisit some of the policy conversations. I think we want to explore some of the innovations that you all are working on in a little bit more detail first, but recognizing that the U.S. has a tremendous historic framework and infrastructure to innovate, but also that there's a lot of work still to be done, I think is an important takeaway there. So Leah, if I can ask you, so Sublime manufactures a drop-in replacement for Portland cement using, as you mentioned in the open, an electrochemical process powered by carbon-free energy instead of traditional cement kilns, avoiding in the process both process and combustion-based CO2 emissions. Can you speak a little bit more about where that idea came from, and what are some of the technical and commercial reasons that led you down that path?
Yeah, well, the idea really came when I met my co-founder at MIT. He's a professor at MIT, Yetming Chang, and he's spun out a number of unicorn startups out of his lab from MIT. So Sublime is successful, it will be his 6th unicorn startup. So he's really got a knack for it. And I'm very lucky I happened to show up right at the right time. And so we started with this tagline of electrochemical cement. So the idea was, in a decarbonized future, beyond 2050, when the grid is decarbonized, when all these problems that we're working on now are solved, there's gonna be a lot of renewable energy, and we're battery scientists. We're used to storing energy. And so, what if instead of storing energy, we think there will be a lot of surplus renewables because wind turbines and solar panels create a lot of off-peak energy. So what if instead of storing that energy, we used it to make something that would otherwise be very carbon intensive? So we started down this, this tagline of electrochemical cement, and then he told me, run off and figure it out, because of course he's a very brilliant and famous and jet set scientist. And so I started with Wikipedia, what is cement, like what is the difference between cement and concrete, et cetera, and then worked backwards through the textbooks and the journal articles, and we penciled together a way to make this happen. And so what we have is, like I said before, an alternative to the kiln. And one of the challenges with Sublime cement, and I think what makes it the most different from Brimstone's approach, and there are similarities, we both use carbon-free rocks as inputs. Sublime avoids the kiln entirely. So I suppose I don't want to go too much into chemistry because it is a rabbit hole for me, so it's dangerous. But to make Portland cement, the stuff that we all use today, you have to go to an incredibly high temperature, because that's the temperature where this certain crystal phase called A-light is stable, and then you quench that phase. And so that's always going to require high temperature. You're always going to have to combust something to do it efficiently. So Sublime took our thesis was, we're going to avoid CO2 emissions entirely, and we're going to make something that's not Portland cement. It's not made at high temperature. It's not made in a kiln, but we do think that it can be a drop-in replacement. And I think that's exciting, and I think both Cody and I are excited by also the American aspect of this. And when you think through history and you go travel the world and you see the pyramids in Giza, or you see the aqueducts in Rome, or the Great Wall of China, all of these monumental and historic contributions to the construction industry and innovation have happened by these big civilizations. And the latest one was Great Britain. They invented Portland cement. And I think it's time for America to leave its mark on history by inventing the next type of cement that we'll use for the next few millennia.
Thank you. That's great. So Cody and Leah, thank you for sort of teeing this up a little bit. Brimstone produces cement chemically and physically identical to Portland cement using a unique process that produces cement from calcium silicate rocks, which have a magnesium element with the added benefit of removing carbon from the atmosphere, which is about the extent of my chemistry experience. What made you, I'll sort of ask you a similar question, right? Sort of what led you to focus on that particular approach?
Yeah, great question. I think I started in a really similar way to Leah. Actually, also an electrochemist, but we do not do electrochemistry in our process. And I sort of started by learning that cement was a big issue for climate that no one is really working on. Like one of the things that I learned pretty early on is dollars invested in cleaning up the industry per ton of emissions is something like 100 times lower than other industries. So for example, dollars invested in transportation for cleaning up transportation are like $16 per ton of CO2 in the industry. Cement is about 1 penny, right? So that felt like a pretty important thing to work on, and worth my time to also read the Wikipedia page, which is where I started. And then I started talking to a lot of customers and structural engineers, builders, folks in the supply chain. And one of the things we realized, pretty quickly is that it feels very hard for the industry to specify a new material. And I don't want to imply that it can't be done. It certainly can be done, right? But it is difficult. And sort of the calculus that goes on into a structural engineer's head is, I'm going to build a building. I don't want it to fall down. I don't want to risk loss of life or loss of money. And if I have the option to build that building with the material that we trust, right, the same material that we've always been built buildings out of, or a new material, it is hard to take the risk to build the new material, even if the new material, maybe as good, right? And that made us think that it would be alternative materials or Portland cement would be faster to scale. So we said, okay, well, can we make Portland cement without CO2? And we looked around. We said, Portland cement, it's a calcium-based material. Where does all the calcium come from? Or where's all the calcium in the world? And the calcium, I was lucky enough to sit half in a geology department, and I learned that the calcium is in 3 places. It is in limestone, where we get it today. Right? This is the process that was invented in the UK to make Portland cement. It is in gypsum, which we can also make Portland cement from via the Mueller-Kuhn process. It was popular in Europe in the sort of mid last century. And then it's also in silicate rocks, which is where I think both Leah or Sublime and Brimstone get their calcium. And silicate rocks happen to be the most abundant rock in the Earth's crust. And we said, okay, can we figure out how to invent a process to make Portland cement from these silicate rocks? And we learned pretty quickly that the answer was yes, we can, which is great because there's no CO2 in the rock. And then And then the final piece is that we said, okay, how can this process, certainly be, lower emissions or even carbon negative? And that answer came to us pretty clearly too. So first of all, like I said, there's no CO2, and then second of all, as Brad mentioned, our process makes a waste product, which is a magnesium-based waste product that passively sequesters CO2. So if we were, sort of over a broad range of any energy scenarios, regardless of what has been deployed to date, our process could be carbon negative or net carbon negative. And our process is totally compatible with electrification. It could be fully electrified. It's so far 100% of the cement that we've made has been using electric kilns in an electrified way. But what we feel is really important, we want to make sure that we can get to scale quickly, so we don't have to sort of wait for deployment of these resources. We can be low carbon regardless of the energy scenario. And then finally for us, there was how we were thinking about it is there's an environmental justice component to this, as in making the same material allowed us to say that we don't have to subject builders to retraining or figuring out a new way to build it, to build with this material. They already know how to build with it, right? Because they've been building with it for in the industry over a century, and that's allows basically the entire industry to keep their jobs and do them the exact same way, which is awesome. And I think that there are also other solutions that are probably like drop-in replacements that maybe have similar attributes to this sort of our theory around that. So, yeah.
Thanks, Cody. I think really appreciate the reference to workforce, right? Which, Leah, you mentioned earlier, just a really crucial part of the conversation. Thom, so LanzaTech has a flagship project in a partnership with ArcelorMittal, which for those who are not aware is a global steelmaker based in Belgium, to demonstrate a steel-and-all facility. Bonus points for branding there. And so in this facility, CO2 and industrial gases from the blast furnace are run through the bio-based technology that you mentioned earlier to produce ethanol. Could you speak a little bit more about that partnership? And in particular, I'm interested in what kind of policy support might be helpful in bringing a project like that to the United States.
Sure. Thanks, Brad. And as Brad knows, my previous employer was ArcelorMittal, full disclosure. So I worked in the government affairs team here in Washington for the company. So actually, let me go back to the quick version of the origin story of LanzaTech, because it leads directly to this project. And that is our founder, Dr. Sean Simpson, and his scientific partners were working in New Zealand with bacteria. So it's called C. auto. If you want to Wikipedia something, you can look up Clostridium autoethanogenum. And it noticed that what that bacteria wants to consume is carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen. And happened to notice there was the BlueScope, another steel company next door, who happens to have industrial gases that just happen to be made up of those constituents. And so asked if they could have a bottle of industrial off-gas and see if we could feed it to this bacteria, and guess what, it works. So the bacteria wants to consume those gases in gas form and then convert them into ethanol as a first resort, and then through synthetic biology go into other chemicals like acetone, isopropanol, and at lab scale we've proven over 100 different chemicals directly. So that leads to the partnership with ArcelorMittal as the world's leading steel producer, looking for the decarbonization options around the world. And as Kevin Dempsey spoke to earlier with AISI, there's no one solution for steel. It really depends on where you are, which process you're starting with, and how you're going to get at those issues ultimately, both technically and economically and in terms of infrastructure. So what the ArcelorMittal plant will do in Belgium, in Ghent, is feed those the industrial off-gases that they would normally be producing, send them over to the LanzaTech facility, which is, think of it like a small biorefinery on the back end of a humongous steel mill. And you could go look at Google Maps if you want to see this, the satellite picture of the tiny little LanzaTech facility next to this really huge steel plant, and convert that into ethanol. And that ethanol is then used, obviously in the US we're used to that as ground transportation additive, but it's really a chemical energy and carbon carrier and can be used at the base of the chemical supply chain, which gets to the ultimate mission that we're trying to do here, which is decarbonize really the entire chemical sector. And while we're doing that, we can decarbonize a number of hard-to-abate sectors, and then going down the supply chain further into sustainable aviation fuel and to other products and industries. So it's really getting at the same point that's been made here by Leah and Cody about finding these really important industrial sectors and how do we decarbonize them and make them synergistic. I mean, the steel industry is also already very synergistic in terms of its ability to use recycling of the actual steel. What didn't really come up earlier in the other panel was the use of steel-making slag, for instance, in replacement for clinker in the cement and concrete industry. And what we're trying to do is take these wastes, this waste carbon that's already above ground, and make things that would ordinarily come from a new barrel of oil. And so that's what Steel-N-All does. It makes ethanol that can then get into the supply chains. And LanzaTech has some really cool stuff on our website with our partnerships with brands, consumer-facing brands that are trying to decarbonize their supply chains, and they have very few solutions for decarbonizing what they use, which it typically comes from a barrel of oil or natural gas liquid. So you can see our Lululemon shorts, our Zara dresses, our Coty, not Cody, but Coty fragrances, et cetera, on shoes.
You don't want my fragrance.
Yeah. There's a very nice LanzaTech-made Gucci fragrance now. And these are getting at sort of niche and sort of just the beginning of deploying this. But the point that I'd love to emphasize from Cody is that we also have an environmental justice angle. We really want to get at the base of the chemical supply chain and show, not just with industrial gases, we can also use agricultural wastes, forestry wastes, biogas, municipal solid waste, non-recyclable municipal solid waste, gasify those and feed them into this process. Humans will always have waste. So we think that there's enough of this waste to really form the basis of the entire petrochemical supply chain. And that is really huge. But to penetrate that, you get to your policy question, right? That's about markets, economics, producing drop-in replacements, and ultimately policy to support that. And so that's along the entire continuum of the research and development, and then deployment. And very excited that the Undersecretary Crane was speaking earlier about even just the creation of the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, OSED, really taking DOE to that next step of once you have a technology, how do you actually deploy it in the real world? How do you make the finances work? How do you make it fit within, I'd say that even the corporate culture of a sector, which is used to doing X, Y, or Z, very similar to the story about architects and building designers want to use Portland cement because they've used it for 100 years and they know what they're doing and it's been thoroughly tested. Similarly, you have to prove through all of these supply chains that these things actually work, and that's a challenge, and to accelerate that to the speed that we need to address climate change before we reach tipping points that we can only imagine. We need to do that, and we need help doing it. And so the incentive programs, et cetera, the procurement, it's all useful and helpful. And then we need to bring more people into that conversation, more people across the political spectrum, more people from different disciplines. We need financing, because ultimately the government piece of this, despite the big numbers and the lots of zeros after the passage of large legislation, it's a drop in the bucket compared to what the private sector is already spending and always spends, and what governments spend on infrastructure writ large. So I think combining all of those things, this conversation is exactly the one that needs to happen. And I do feel, having worked in the energy and climate space for 20-something years at this point, the industrial conversation is sort of the latest, and it has taken us a long time to get here for people to really understand where things come from, how they're made, and what we can do about it in the future.
Thanks. I mean, a lot of really excellent points there, and I think a couple that again sort of strike me here. The ubiquity, right, of opportunities for innovation. You sort of touched on all of the various sectors in which you're operating. I think is a good reminder that this touches literally every facet of the economy, And also the point about leveraging private sector investment, right? Really critical. The government is not going to be able to spend their way into solving this problem. We're going to have to figure out how to catalyze private sector investment at scale and with some urgency as well. And with that in mind, I'm interested to hear, and I think everybody in the audience hopefully, I think, has a clear sense of the really remarkable innovations that all of you and your companies are working on, but they're always challenges, right? And so I think obviously a key focus of policy is helping to drive down costs of these technologies. But in addition to driving down costs, what are some of the chief barriers that you're facing to scale? And what are some of the ways that policy specifically could address those barriers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So of course, driving down cost is important, and you drive down cost by getting scale, so making things larger. And I think a big challenge is speed. I think like David Crane said this morning, we don't have much time to do this. We have until 2030, which is in, time flies. That's really soon. That's like in 7 years. And then we also have till 2050 to get to net zero. And so I think the challenge is speed. And I think the public-private partnerships are so important for moving beyond just the R&D, like into those second 2 Ds. So it's a matter of working quickly. And I think what the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations is absolutely huge. That really, addresses the valley of death with these industrial decarbonization technologies, where they have to be demonstrated and de-risked, both the product and the process, before you can make that investment into a 1 million ton per year cement plant, or even perhaps a 5 million ton per year cement plant. And so this Office of Demonstration, putting in 50% cost share and having those public-private partnerships is absolutely critical for making this happen.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that Leah said, I think 100% agree with, is you need to get to scale in order to be cost parity or better, and we need to get a cost parity or better to have speed, and also to extend beyond U.S. borders and scale and decarbonize cement globally. But in order to get scale, right, you need to build a 1 to 5 million ton per year production facility, and that costs like up to $1 billion. And there are not too many venture capitalists who are excited about giving away $1 billion. So you really need to start accessing pots of money that banks really can give out. So the government programs that are specifically orchestrated for that are amazing, right? The LPO, the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations are filling this exact role, right? This bridge to bankability. But there's another thing that you also need to get to bankability, which is advanced market commitments. Right? So no bank will finance a plant if you don't have some guaranteed revenue. That's too much risk for a bank. I guess these bankers, they don't make very much money, so they need to make sure that this risk is mitigated. But with industries like cement, it's like 50 to 60% of cement, the government is the final payee. So it's sort of absurd to think that we could actually have a advanced market commitment that was large enough for the scale that's required to get to cost parity without government doing advanced market commitments. And to be very clear, when I say advanced market commitments, I'm not saying the government needs to give startups like us money in advance. I'm just saying they need to give us a contract saying they will buy our product that we can take to a bank so that the bank gives us money, right? It should be nothing should be dispersed from Treasury until they buy cement until they actually buy the cement, right? It just has to be a contract, and that's what we really need to get the bank, and we would love to see that. And I know that Secretary Crane mentioned this briefly, so I know that they're working on it, and I think it's exciting.
Yeah, thanks. I think the point about offtake, right, has been, I think, a consistent theme throughout the morning. Thom?
Yeah, I can just build on what the previous panelists have said. And I would focus on a couple of other different barriers. By the way, I could spend all day talking about barriers, and that's what I do every day. Unfortunately, I mean, this honestly, for the need for what we're trying to do, this should be easier, but it's just not. The stuff that we're trying to do is very hard. And a couple of the barriers are on the policy side, sort of having policymakers, and speaking with wearing my former Senate hat for over 15 years, sometimes policymakers think they know what they're doing and think they know the answer. And all the experts around the world come in and tell them, here are the things that you need to do, et cetera. Then they draw policies up that have some pretty specific corners around them. And that is deadly to innovation. So really coming up with policies that are more technology neutral, performance based. I think we got a lot of this in the tax legislation last year. Much better approach where you're really trying to get at what's the point, government? What are you trying to move? How are you trying to value these technologies? Is it around jobs? Is it around carbon intensity, et cetera? So if we can really think about what are the outcomes that need to come from policy and then build the policy to help get you there, that's really important for innovation. And within that is also this concept of the perfect being the enemy of the good. And we see this around the world. Oftentimes when governments are trying to implement a policy, then you have the stakeholder community, you have advocates, you have us. I mean, everybody's working on these things. And there's really a desire to get everything perfect. And for anybody who's worked in policy or anybody who is alive and has ever tried to do something and think they're going to do X in the future, but it ends up being Y, it's impossible to get things perfect. So the question is, can you create policy and then can you deploy technologies that are really good, that really start addressing the problem, that really get it, into supply chains and change how we do things over time, because there is no magical moment at some X date in the future where you can just flip a switch and technologies turn on. Technologies and innovation need time to develop and to scale. And then my final point is another barrier that doesn't get discussed that much, but I've sort of alluded to it earlier, is sort of corporate culture or supply chain culture. Just so the way people think of, this is how we do this industry, this is how we do this thing. And there's a lot of pressure on these industries. And I'd say at where you're hitting the supply chain today, industry, really the steel, cement, concrete, glass, aluminum, I mean, the sort of base of the economy, there is a lot of weight on these industries' shoulders. And it's not necessarily fair because they're doing what they do the way they know how to do it. And we have very few mechanisms to spread a change to how we do that to the ultimate consumer. Ultimately, as the consumers, we're the ones that are actually responsible for our carbon footprints, and we should be demanding change and also willing to pay a little more during this transition to get to the future where we can have communities that aren't polluted, where we can have a globe that isn't on fire and literally in chaos every single day with people dying. And so in order to do that, we actually have to have a little bit of cultural change, I think, as well. And the ultimate message being, for those companies, it's okay to try stuff. And that's where the government can come in and help with some, alleviate some of that risk, because the banks or other financiers that really want low risk investments, they're not going to invest in that stuff. But we need these companies to be able to make a decision. And I think for the last decade or so, a lot of industrials have been sort of, they've been setting really ambitious goals, but then sort of sitting on the sidelines because not really sure if we should spend that $1 billion on X, or maybe we need to go down Y. And then we get into the discussions about hydrogen and carbon capture and utilization and storage and infrastructure and all the sort of impediments to each one of those. It's very hard what we're trying to do, and there are lots of barriers. But if we can all just agree to work through them and deploy, that's the key to really taking innovation and connecting it to the real world.
Yeah, thanks, Thom. A lot of really good points there. So I want to pick up on a thread that I think has come up a couple of times, both in this discussion and also earlier this morning, which is really the sort of trade component, right? Cody, you mentioned this is a global problem. We have to figure out how to export these technologies globally. And so as we think about some of the policies that have been proposed to get at that challenge, right? Obviously, the EU is pretty far along the road in terms of developing the CBAM. how do you think about the potential impact or benefit of a policy to address emissions at home in that respect? And are there specific elements of design that you would really like to see policymakers consider as they're working through that kind of a proposal?
Yeah, I think especially for cement, CBAM was so important in Europe, so that carbon border adjustment. And I think it's especially important here in the US, particularly on the West Coast, where so much of our cement comes from China. And so I think if we want to not only have an impact on lowering our carbon emissions, but also maintain US competitiveness, especially when we're developing new technologies, I really do think that we should consider legislation like that here in the US.
Yeah, I think that carbon border adjustments could be a really, really helpful tool in order to create cost competitiveness in early days. So like Leah said, and has been said many times here, you need to get to scale to be cost parity or better. Policies like a carbon border adjustment can help prevent or can give a leg up to technologies that are not at scale yet, like all of our technologies. However, like I said before, we want to be really careful that we are developing and funding technologies that are going to be ultimately lower cost at scale so they can scale globally, right? And in that case, a carbon border adjustment wouldn't be needed in the long term because it would be a lower cost, you're ultimately making a lower cost product. So you sort of have to, there's a tricky line to walk there. But I think it's one of those things where we need to make sure that we are developing technologies that can actually decarbonize globally, not just the US, because we all share one atmosphere and climate change is not really going to care if only the US decarbonizes. And then we also need to make sure that we are developing policies that are can help. And I would argue, however, that like an advanced market commitment would be a more effective policy than a carbon border adjustment because of that.
I would say from LanzaTech's perspective, and we are at scale. We have 3 commercially running units around the world, and we have 3 more coming online this year. So we're ready. We're ready to deploy. But back to my point about we need partner companies. So we're actually a licensing technology right now. We have to convince an entity that has, in our case, in the early case, industrial emissions, right? We have to convince them, our technology is the one you should choose for your industrial emissions. Give them to us, feed them to us. We'll produce this other product, and we'll show how carbon utilization really is the great way to go. And in order to do that, they need to make an investment decision. So I think, and the product they make in those cases are almost entirely tradable, and they're highly commoditized, and they do move around the world. So I think border adjustments and those approaches are definitely policies that should be on the table. It's something I've been working on for quite some time. I worked on the Bingham Inspector cap and trade bill back in 2007. We had a border adjustment, so this conversation has been going on for some time. And I really think where it's heading is it's sort of setting up a pressure club around the world. Which countries and which geographies are really going to take this energy transition seriously? And when they do that, we're gonna provide some level of protection for those investments in those areas, but then still allow global trade to happen between those countries. And again, really getting to a performance-based metric. And in order to do that, then I think the real challenge that we all have to work through, and these industries have to work through, is about data, about transparency, and understanding how you're measuring these things, how you measure products, how you define products. You get into the weeds really quickly with this policy area, but I'm really, really glad that there are Senate offices here. I know Senator Cassidy's staff is here working very hard on this. Senator Coons has been working on issues as well. So getting this right for those investments in the U.S. that then can be exported, right? I mean, that's where, for me, it's really exciting, is reshoring U.S. manufacturing, using our competitive advantage that we already have, because our industries are, by and large, the cleanest in the world. And there's a reason. We have some really strong environmental laws, and we've done that for quite some time. And so we should take advantage of that, but at the same time, make sure that additional investments that really do have to be made. If we're getting to zero is a really small number, if you haven't noticed. And when it gets to emissions, that's going to be extremely challenging. And in order to make those investments, we do need to give businesses not just the incentives, but also the protection that they're not just going to be undercut with carbon leakage.
If I may chime in on something that's been said quite often this morning, is talking about performance-based standards. And I think it was said this morning by CRH in reference to the asphalt as well. I think that's so important for people to adopt performance-based standards because it allows you to solve the right problem. So speaking about cement, we want a low carbon building material that works. So setting a performance-based, data-driven standard that says, this is the strength, the durability, the set time, the flow, everything you need. I'm sure Lanza Tech has their own performance-based, data-driven requirements. That really lets you solve for the problem and not for, the chemistry, or it doesn't give that advantage to the status quo that I think is so important for moving forward quickly.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. So we are just about at the end of our time, so I'd like to wrap by asking a sort of a lightning round, an extended lightning round, final question, which is really, what gives you optimism about our ability collectively to address industrial emissions and drive decarbonization in the sector?
Yeah, what gives me optimism and enthusiasm, and I think I said it before, is that here in the States, we have the smartest people working harder because we're doing something inspiring that matters. And I think that's incredible, and I think that's what makes America amazing. So that's what makes me so excited every day to come to work. And I think that the second thing that gives me optimism is seeing bipartisan collaboration. And again, I'm speaking as a Canadian. I find US politics to be quite exhausting personally. I think there's a lot of division and a lot of noise, and so seeing collaboration around doing the right thing, and I think that's what's going to make America prosperous. And so being here today is in part what's fueling my optimism.
Thanks. Yeah, for me it is seeing all of the incredible market-based solutions that are out there. So in the United States, or I guess I should say in the world, every country on earth basically uses some form of capitalism. There's a few different shades, but we're all generally in the tent of capitalism. And if we're gonna scale climate technologies in that tent, then we need to make technologies that are cost parity or better at scale. And the U.S. is really, really good at driving innovation along those lines, right? The U.S. is, kind of likes to be very, provide a lot of help and support through organizations like the DOE and Office of Clean Energy demonstrations for early stage R&D, D&D, and D&D, and D. But and then let the technologies live or die in the market, which is a really important test for scaling globally. And I see a lot of companies that are thinking about that really critically and thinking and innovating around climate, and which makes me think that we can actually scale these technologies globally and solve the problem. So super excited about that.
All right, thanks. Thom, last word.
Yeah, so I'm optimistic about innovation, technology, and our ability to solve these problems. I actually do think in the industrial space, there are so many smart people, there are so many smart engineers, and when you set them upon a mission, solve this problem, that's what they live for, and that is what motivates them, to Leia's point. So I think there really is a bright future, and actually I see quite a lot of synergies both inside the United States on a bipartisan basis to reshore manufacturing, to do things here. And when we do that, we can choose to do them better, right? We're not sort of saddled with the kinds of dirty production that is prevalent in other countries, for example. So I think there's a lot of benefits to doing this in the U.S. at this point in time, and that broad support that then can help lift the whole world and lift all people around the world, and particularly those who have the least among us in the global south and in our own country and in all developed economies. We have these pockets of places where there has not been historically environmental justice, and I think we can bring that through this new clean energy technology, which brings jobs, health, and a prosperous future.
That's a great way to end it. Please join me in thanking Leah, Cody, and Thom for a great discussion.
We have one last really exciting discussion today. So we've talked about a lot of different kinds of technologies that could help decarbonize the sector, and fundamentally, the biggest source of emissions within the industrial subsectors are heat and generating heat. And so our final conversation is going to be about that most important part of the industrial decarbonization puzzle, that most important piece, which is how do we get huge amounts of really hot, very low greenhouse gas emission heat into these systems. And so with that, I'm going to welcome Abigail Rajiski from Breakthrough Energy, who's going to ably moderate our discussion.
Rich, and thanks everyone for sticking around to the final panel before lunch. Really excited about this conversation. So as Rich mentioned, industrial heat, it's a really big source of emissions. It's about 50% of all industrial emissions in the US, and so it's a really big problem. In industry, as you've heard in the other panels, it's really about transforming materials, changing molecules, changing phases of metals and things like that. So you need a lot of energy to make those transformations, and a lot of that comes through heat. And right now, a lot of the ways that we do that is we burn fossil fuels to create that heat energy for all these different types of reactions. And you know what? They're doing a great job for the actual processes. And so these have become very efficient now. Of course, there are negative externalities to those. We know that. We know we need to reduce the emissions, as well as other pollution that might come from these sources of heat. So what's really exciting, I think, about our panel today is you'll get to hear not only about how to reduce these industrial heat emissions, but how to do it in different ways. So it's not just a big problem, but it's a really big opportunity to reduce emissions and diversify the technologies that we actually use to heat various industrial processes and make new materials. So really excited to hear from our panelists today. First, we'll have Brandon McDonald, who's Director of Product at VIA Separations. Then we have Andrew Ponick, CEO at Antora Energy. And we have Ben Reinke, who is Vice President of Global Business Development at X Energy. Before we jump into the discussion, I'm going to give each of them a chance to kind of tell us a bit about themselves, as well as their company and technology. So first, we'll start with Andrew. Tell us about yourself, Antora, what solution you all are bringing to industrial heat.
All right. Well, great to be here. Thanks so much. So I'm here representing Antora Energy, and our goal is to help heavy industry decarbonize quickly by allowing it to run directly off of solar and wind electricity. So it's probably not a surprise to anyone here that solar and wind are cheap and getting cheaper, but I want to emphasize just how cheap that is. There are many places in the US and around the world where solar and wind are now the cheapest form of energy that humanity has ever had. That is an incredibly powerful tool for industrial decarbonization. If you go to any large industrial customer and you say, would you like to switch your primary energy source from fossil fuels to something that's zero carbon and that's also cheaper, they'll say, of course. But if you follow that up by saying there's a limitation that if you do so, you can only run your plant 30% of the time, that would be a non-starter. So Antora Energy's goal is to remove that limitation, allow heavy industry to run directly off of wind and solar electricity by providing high temperature thermal energy storage. So it would be hard to overstate how large these heat flows are in industry. I mean, a small industrial facility might be measured in the tens of megawatts, large facilities in the gigawatts. So if you want to solve the variability problem with energy storage, that energy storage needs to be massive in its capacity, and it has to be very, very cheap. So we spent the first few years at Antora determining what a solution to that would be. We looked at a bunch of different technologies and a technology-neutral approach, and about 18 months ago, we had a solution that we thought would work. So the way our system works is you take electricity from wind and solar when it's available, you run that through resistive heating elements, just like a toaster coil, to heat up carbon blocks to very high temperatures, white hot, above 1500 C. And then you continuously extract that stored heat as steam in our first product or high temperature industrial heat to drive steel and cement in our second product. So 18 months ago, we brought that concept then to some of the best investors in the industry, Breakthrough Energy Ventures, Lower Carbon Capital, Trust Ventures, and they believed in that vision and started on the journey with us. So we raised a $50 million Series A, and the purpose of that was to build a pilot project and prepare the product for manufacturability. So we recently completed construction of that pilot, and we're now commissioning it. And so now we're getting ready to start manufacturing of our thermal battery modules for shipment to customers and turning those systems on in 2025. So if we execute this well, this product has a potential to strike right at the heart of industrial heat emissions. It can serve almost every industry at any temperature range that's used widely, any geography that has wind and solar, and at any scale. The product is built with materials that are earth abundant, inexpensive, and domestically sourced, so there aren't a lot of barriers to scaling this up to the massive scale we need for rapid decarbonization. So a lot of challenges ahead, which I'm sure we'll get into in the panel, but that's a little bit about Antora. Excited to hear about VIA and X-Energy.
Thanks, Andrew. Brandon, we'll turn to you next. Tell us a bit about VIA Separations, how you all are addressing industrial heat, and what your role is as Director of Product.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction. It's really exciting to be here, and thank you to ClearPath and the Clean Air Task Force for putting this great event on. A little bit about myself. I am another Canadian chemist, so great to see that we are well represented up here on the stage today, leading a lot of VIA's technical efforts and development and manufacturing of our membrane technology. So at VIA, we're working to decarbonize the approximately 12% of all US energy that currently goes into industrial separations. And the way we're tackling this is by replacing what are currently really energy-intensive thermal processes, distillation, evaporation, things like that, with membrane separation, so with filtration. And so by doing that, you're able to reduce the amount of energy needed per gallon of product produced by as much as 90%. So the analogy we like to use is if you're cooking a pot of pasta, you could just leave it on the stovetop until all the water is evaporated. It's a lot easier and more energy efficient if you just pour it through a strainer. So what we're developing is that strainer sort of at the molecular scale and designed for working with industrial materials and process fluids. So as a company, we have startup spun out of MIT, just had our 6th birthday last week, about 50 folks in the Boston area. And working, our beachhead market is in the pulp and paper sector. Might talk about this a little more, but we recently announced our first commercial system going into the ground starting up next year. And sort of similar, want to start there, but really expand and develop this technology across chemical, food and beverage, semiconductor. There's a large swath of different industries where this technology can make a big decarbonization impact.
Thanks, Brandon. All right, last but not least, Ben, tell us a bit more about yourself and X-Energy and your technology and how it's going to impact the industrial sector.
Yeah, thanks so much. I am not a chemist, I'm a nuclear engineer, excuse me, by background, and I'm not Canadian, but I was in Toronto yesterday and got in late last night. So we do have a Canadian subsidiary, and I was up there with our team, which was great. So, you know, a little bit about us and me. I lead our global business development group, which is, you know, trying to find new ways to take reactors and deploy them with potential customers. We at X-Energy are developing a high-temperature gas-cooled reactor. That's an advanced reactor that is inherently safe it can be used to provide process heat or electricity, or a combination of those two, to a customer. And in the past, this type of technology was conceptualized originally in the US. It's moved abroad and been developed by a number of different countries. But the US Department of Energy programs to try to bring a more efficient version of the fuel to market have allowed us to take this technology and bring it to market for the first time in a viable way in the US. So there's a long track record of the development of this technology, but the use case and the capability of the technology today is better than it's ever been before. We're deploying our reactors under what's called the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. So we'll have 4 high-temperature reactors deployed in partnership with our first customer, which is Dow Chemical. Dow is located all over the world, as you know, but our first project will be at the Seadrift site, which is in Seadrift, Texas, about 150 miles south of Houston. And that facility today makes a number of high-value products. I think you heard so far in the panel, what we're really talking about today is taking a material out of the ground and then turning it into a higher value product. And Dow does that at this facility, makes a number of important materials that go into everything from your cell phone to high voltage cables that allow us to move electricity around the United States. And at that facility, Dow needs quite a bit of steam, high temperature steam in particular, and they also need electricity. So we're deploying 4 of our reactors under this US Department of Energy program with Dow, and we'll be bringing those reactors online in 2029. You know, I know we're here to talk about industrial applications specifically. This is exciting because we're opening up a new market for nuclear. It changes the total addressable market for us and for many of our competitors. And we're expected to be the first SMR online grid scale in the West. But we also are leveraging that for additional learning and the ability to de-risk a new technology coming to market. And so this morning we announced that we are signing a joint development agreement with Energy Northwest, a utility based in Central Washington, to deploy up to 12 additional reactors as a fast follower to our Dow project. So we made that announcement, I think, when the wire broke this morning, and that would be fast following Dow with the first units targeted to come on in 2030. Most likely an all-electric play. However, when you have low-cost electricity, you start to draw a lot of industry to the area. And so I think what we'll see over time is an ecosystem built around X-energy units in Central Washington, hopefully decarbonizing not only electricity, but also potentially process heat as well.
Thanks, Ben. Congrats on the announcement today as well. Before we kind of dive into more specific examples and conversations, I want to just kind of level set at the top and hear from you all why you and your companies decided to start to think about the industrial sector. We've heard, from other panelists kind of their journey and how they got here, but just wanted to hear from you, why industrial heat in particular and why now? So maybe we'll start with Brandon this time.
Sure, great question. I think at sort of a high level, we think of ourselves as climate optimists. So when we're envisioning a future, whether it's 2050 or beyond, want to envision one where we're at net zero, but we're also manufacturing lots of great products that are improving quality of life for people both here and around the world. And to get there, solving industrial processes, industrial heat, and decarbonizing that is, I think, not just a nice to have, but something that's going to be really necessary to do and to solve, and to help reshore and bring manufacturing back to this country specifically. For VIA as a company, or a little bit of our story, the first year and a half or so of our existence did some technical development, but really it was anyone who would take our calls. We were doing customer discovery and trying to figure out what are pain points for folks across various sectors. And again, would come up with, we have these separation processes. If there was something out there that was a lot more or a lot less energy intensive, that would be great. We love to adopt that. We have climate and sustainability goals for 2030, 2050 that often there's not a clear path to hitting, so these companies need help getting there. But then at the same time, these are commodity industries, forestry, chemical manufacturing. So it also has to be something that today makes sense for their bottom line and enables cost savings through energy reductions or breaking of production bottlenecks or creating value-added products. So that really, having that customer pull was super helpful in previous jobs I've worked. It was really, we've got a neat technology and we want to push it on you, which is a much worse place to be. So having that, and then a lot of investors in this time frame being excited about tough tech and investing in hard technology. I think when we started, if you talked about decarbonization to folks who weren't already working on it, folks would often kind of look at you quizzically and think that's not a real word. But seeing that be really adopted and more widespread now. And then, you know, the Department of Energy and government support has been pretty critical to our journey as well, and some of the policies the Department of Energy has put in place and helped fund our development. So it's really the confluence of all those factors convinced us it was the right problem to tackle and the right time to do it.
That's great. Thanks, Brendan. Andrew, how about you? Why industrial heat? Why now?
Yeah, why industrial heat? You know, similar thinking. It's huge. I mean, it's just such a huge part of U.S. emissions. We've heard about that all morning, and global emissions. And we were really looking for what would have the biggest impact. I really love what you just mentioned about you know, not trying to push a solution on the market. You know, when we started with industrial energy, we really wanted to have the problem drive the solution. And so, you know, we didn't come out saying we're going to try to commercialize graphite-based energy storage. Actually, early on in the company's history, we were looking at totally different material sets. And so that's the why industry. On the why now, as I mentioned before, the confluence of you know, the need to decarbonize with the incredibly low cost of variable renewable energy was so tantalizing. It was clear that renewables could do the job if not for the variability. And I think everybody would agree, if renewables were able to hit the incredibly low cost of wind and solar, but also produce 24/7, that would be the ideal source of energy for industry and for all sorts of other things we need to do for decarbonization. And so we really liked that there was essentially one last problem that needed to be solved before this could solve, and not just one problem, but a ton of different problems within industrial decarbonization.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Ben, you know, you already mentioned this a little bit. You know, when folks think about nuclear energy, they might not be really thinking about the industrial sector at first, really more kind of power sector generation. So how did you all start thinking about using your technology in industry, and why now?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when our technology was originally developed, you know, I mentioned it's got a long history. There were many different countries that looked at this as a way of producing high temperature process heat. You know, I appreciate that there are a lot of parts of the energy problem you can solve with electricity, but getting to the high temperature process heat conundrum is one of the key factors to really decarbonizing heavy industry. If you go back in time, there were all kinds of different drivers that forced people to think about these new technologies in new ways. Today's existing nuclear reactors can't achieve the temperatures that our reactor can, and we're able to do that in an extremely safe way. What happened was, you know, if you want to jump back in history briefly, in 2005, the Energy Policy Act of 2005 drove a high temperature gas-cooled reactor policy at the market. And at that point in time, the idea was a really, really big reactor to make near infinite hydrogen, and that we would drive the hydrogen economy of tomorrow. It's, you know, here we are 20 years later talking about trying to drive the hydrogen economy of tomorrow in many venues. And one of the problems was we tried to force a technology on the market that the market was not ready to take. And over time, our company took a lot of the lessons learned and a lot of the technology that was developed under that program, and then repackaged it to a size that we thought the market really wanted. It was a smaller reactor, and it was a reactor that would operate at these temperatures and be useful for a whole host of different applications. So when we went at the market, we were looking to be sized appropriately to help replace coal plants, knowing that they were going to be turning off and that the world would be pivoting away from coal broadly. We wanted to make sure that the reactor had a high amount of flexibility. So our reactor, because of the actual physics in the reactor, it load follows, not like today's reactors where you may dump steam, but you can actually turn the reactor power level up and down at a rate of 5% per minute. So that's, you can run 60% power transient in 12 minutes. That's as fast as a lot of natural gas peaker plants. And we wanted to make sure that we were able to extract process heat either from a single unit or by tying multiples together and sizing that right for what the market wanted. So we had a lot of this in mind, but to be totally clear with you, we did not believe the industrial market was going to come at us this fast. If you asked us 2 years ago what we thought for sure that the largest utilities in America would be the first to adopt advanced nuclear at large scale because they had the most experience in operating nuclear reactors. Today, what we're seeing is that investors, ESG goals and requirements at various companies and their customers are driving a lot of heavy industry to try to decarbonize faster than many utilities have in their own projections. And the other part is when you look at Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, it means that you also need to figure out how to decarbonize this heavy industry high temperature process heat. And there aren't a lot of technologies that can go and take down that problem. So that really drove Dow to come talk to us early and started opening up a market application that was much broader than we originally realized. And today we're seeing a tremendous amount of interest from heavy industry as well as utilities.
Great, thanks, Ben. It's really interesting to hear all of you talk about, really knowing the customer, knowing the market, and the market really kind of being ready for these solutions now. So now that we have kind of your origin stories, why, how you got here today, let's talk a little bit more about some of your first projects that you're really excited about. Industry has a lot of different subsectors, which use a lot of different individual processes. They're all unique. So we'd love to hear more on, your first customers, a little bit more about that partnership, which again here I think is so unique and important. We had a first panel of kind of existing heavy industry players who are all kind of doing their part, thinking about the technologies they want to put into place. We had, the second panel of some really great startups with really new innovations and emerging technologies to address, industrial emissions. And what I love hearing from all of you already is just the partnership between your startups, the technologies that you're bringing, and the incumbent industries who are now getting that pressure to decarbonize. And so would really love to kind of pull on that and hear more about that partnership and the relationships that you're building with industry. Ben, we've heard from you, about the Dow partnership, so maybe just kind of poking on that a little bit more, would love to hear a bit more about that partnership, and as well, you mentioned, ARDP. How has that program really enabled, that project and that partnership with Dow?
Yeah, thanks very much. And also thanks for letting me tee myself up. So the short version of this is Dow is an ideal customer for a lot of ways to help us bring this technology to market. They've been driving innovation. It's sort of in their DNA for decades. As a company, Dow has grown and pivoted, brought many first technologies to market, but they do that because they want to be an industry leader and grow their company, not because they're doing it for necessarily a perfectly altruistic reason. It's part of their business and part of their DNA. And so Dow has a very simple set of goals today, which is to decarbonize while growing the company. If you shook down all of their strategy to two things, that's what they often like to say. And if they're not able to grow the company, there's not a future. And so they recognize that they're going to need enabling technologies to allow that to happen together at the same time. That drove them to look at a number of different really cool, innovative processes. For example, they've got a very large kind of global scale cracker that they're deploying with a circular hydrogen play and carbon capture in Canada. And it's well suited for that type of technology to decarbonize a large ethylene cracker. With us, we're well suited to a host of different temperature needs that they have at their other manufacturing facilities. And so they've found a great use case for us that meets the timelines for when they were going to need to shut down their existing operating assets and to deploy a new technology with zero emissions. So Dow's kind of already thinking about this. They're driving toward new opportunities. Wasn't easy trying to explain nuclear to a heavy industry partner or for them to explain their processes to a bunch of nuclear engineers. But we've been at it for a while now, getting to know one another and figuring out how to open up this market. It is both a great opportunity to deploy our first reactors, but also to demonstrate to the world that this is doable. So just a couple quick points on the project itself. What we'll be doing is fully decarbonizing the industrial heat required for the facility as well as the electricity required for the facility. We'll be deploying 4 reactors there in kind of a flexible configuration. So we'll provide steam at the temperatures required into Dow's steam header facility. They'll distribute that around their own existing assets today. And we'll provide electricity to the plant as well. And we've oversized our plant slightly so that we're able to provide to them a highly redundant product. So when you think about this, heavy industry often needs either 100% reliable electricity or 100% reliable steam. On occasion, they may need kind of both, but when they're not operating, they're not making money. And so Dow at this facility has an extremely high expectation for reliability of steam, well over 99% reliability over an extended period of time. And there is no technology that alone can do that. The only way to do that is to build in some redundancy into the system. So our unit size is relatively well-sized to be able to do this. We're not a 300 megawatt individual reactor. We're an 80 megawatt electric individual reactor. And so you can begin to tie reactors together in a way that provides excess reliability over what you would expect from a normal capacity factor. So those types of things are not just driving us to move forward with that project, but opening up the aperture for what's possible in nuclear in ways that we've never seen before. ARDP is critical, so I'll try to just make this brief. The Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program was structured in a way that required a technology developer like us to bring a potential customer with us into the process. Now, when we originally started ARDP, Energy Northwest, the company I mentioned earlier, was actually our first planned partner for deployment. And Energy Northwest and Dow both agreed that the right answer was for Dow to step into the ARDP role and to lead us forward on the first project. But that's helping to de-risk the Energy Northwest project that's fast following. The goal of ARDP was not to just build a reactor or a technology. It was to de-risk that and to demonstrate to the market that there was a technology that fit what a customer needed and that we could deploy that technology on a time frame relevant to global competition with Russia and China on nuclear. And in particular, there are a whole host of things if you read the law, but in general, we wanted to see advanced reactor technologies that were highly flexible and innovative and could meet the needs of the market future as opposed to exactly what we had at that time when the awards were made. So ARDP is paying for 50% cost share for the overnight CapEx for the first 4 reactors. It's also paying for 50% of our non-recurring engineering that we at X-Energy carry in IP development, and our investors bring money into our company to help us do. And it's also paying for 50% of the first commercial scale deployment of our fuel technology, which we call TRISO-X, and that's located in Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
Thanks, Ben. Great to hear more about that partnership with Dow, but then also hearing that public-private partnership with the ARDP program and how incredibly important that's been to this project. Brandon, let's move to you next. You also mentioned your first commercial deployment coming soon, and that's with International Paper. Could you tell us a bit more about that project, that partnership, and why the pulp and paper industry in particular has been such a strong initial partner for VIA?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with maybe the last part of the question and then work back to the beginning. So when we're assessing which markets we want to go into, look at a number of factors, but some of the biggest ones are the total market size, related to that, the potential for CO2 or CO2 equivalent offset, and then whether it's a good technical fit for what we think we can develop. The pulp and paper industry really ticks all 3 of those boxes for VIA. So where we slot in specifically into that process with pulp mills is treating black liquor. It's a byproduct of the pulping process. It's essentially a chemical soup of everything that doesn't get made into a paper product. And so at the approximately 230 pulp mills across North America, they're generating anywhere between a couple hundred and a couple thousand gallons per minute of black liquor that then needs to be treated. So the existing process is to evaporate off the water, condense that for reuse, and then once you've done that, you can burn the organic material that remains, feed that energy back into the plant, and recover the chemicals. So it's a huge opportunity if you can replace that evaporation with much more energy-efficient membrane separations, can cut that down and offset up to about 130 million metric tons per year if it were to be deployed all across North America. So started pursuing that really aggressively as a first market in about 2019. 2 years ago, went out and started to do our first field pilots, so took our system out of the lab, went to 3 different mills across the country, plugged directly into their process and showed that this technology works in the field over about 6,000 hours, which I think is between 8 or 9 months of total operational runtime. And so based on the success of that or building on that, have had a great collaboration with International Paper. They're one of the biggest players in the market. Have been working with them for multiple years now to develop that partnership and figure out what's the right time to take this from the pilot stage and make that next step to a full commercial operation. And so we announced last month that building our first commercial unit, broke ground on that recently, so the cement and steel is going in as we speak, and are excited for that system to start up early 2024.
Very exciting. And maybe one follow-up to have you elaborate on is just if you could say a bit more on how the U.S. research innovation ecosystem, maybe Department of Energy, programs as well, have helped via kind of through this commercialization process.
Absolutely. So to echo what a little bit of what Leah was talking about earlier, I think there's no better place in the world to start a tough tech company than in the United States. The best schools are here. A lot of the smartest people in the world are here, and those that aren't want to come here, and it'd be great if we could find ways to bring more of them into the country. So in addition to that, there's the venture capital, the financing, that's mature, and then really the entrepreneurial spirit, and no shortage of folks who want to take big bets to change the world and make a big dent in the future. So we've benefited from all of that. We're in the Boston area, so have sort of been doubly blessed in that sense, where there's a ton of great schools, but also a great community. Before we moved into our own space, we worked in a couple different incubators, surrounded by other startups that we were able to learn and share and collaborate with. And then, DOE funding they've been great as a partner throughout the process, both in terms of helping to fund our projects, but having that sort of stamp of approval that we went through some very competitive processes and were selected as for receiving taxpayer money. It really opens the doors with investors and customers as well. I will say our first commercial system that I'm talking about, however, is not based here domestically. It's going to be deployed in Alberta in Canada. And one of the reasons for that is Canada has a carbon tax, about $70 a ton currently, and ratcheting up to, I think, $170 by 2030. So that really plays into International Paper or other customers when they're thinking about what are the incentives for where we want to deploy these systems. And so we really want to have the policies and develop our technology so that we can deploy it domestically and start to not just reap the benefits of R&D here, but bring jobs, deploy our technology to a lot of these sites where there's mills or manufacturing that are historically disadvantaged, and capture those benefits here as well.
Great, and we'll follow up on that thread of additional policy in a little bit. So Andrew, congrats on kind of commissioning and first manufacture some of your the thermal batteries. Last week, Energy Innovation also released a report on thermal batteries broadly that was featured in Forbes, and it posed the opportunity of thermal batteries potentially being able to reduce U.S. industrial heating power costs by half. And you talked about this a little bit as well, but would love to hear more on how Antora's approach to decarbonizing industrial heat, creates that opportunity not just for emissions reductions, but also for cost reductions. And then tell us a little bit more about some of the first initial customers and subsectors that you all are thinking about.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for teeing that up. So the Energy Innovation Report, by the way, is excellent. Anyone who's interested in learning more about thermal energy storage, it's a great resource. And I think you got at the core of why this approach is so compelling. If you look at the economics of thermal energy storage paired with inexpensive variable renewables like solar and wind, you have one of the only solutions that can get you massive amounts of decarbonization without subsidy. So there are a lot of great ways to decarbonize, a lot of hard problems to decarbonize. that are going to, for a relatively long period of time, require pretty heavy subsidies, which is important, and we have to do as much as we can in a lot of ways to get these new technologies off the ground. But it's really exciting to us and others in our field that because you have variable wind and solar that is so inexpensive, you're starting with a cheaper source of energy than fossil fuels. So if your source of energy is cheaper than fossil fuels, what you just have to do is make sure that the cost adder that comes from putting that energy into a thermal battery and then taking it out again doesn't raise that price to the point that it's above than the cost of fossil fuels. So, some of the customers that we're speaking with, and I can get into this a little more later, are really looking in the 2030 timeframe, for instance, competing directly against the cost of natural gas in the United States, which, as you might know, has some of the cheapest natural gas in the world. So at the point that you can start saying, can you beat the cost of Henry Hub natural gas over a 10-year contract, that opens a market that is extraordinarily large. So the main thing that you have to do, though, as I said, is make sure that thermal battery is really, really cheap. And so that's why at Antora our work has been so focused on technoeconomics. There are a lot of things that you can do to demonstrate a thermal battery. It's actually a very simple system. It's not hard at all to take electricity and turn it into heat. It's actually not hard at all to turn electricity into high temperature heat. This is a small pet peeve of mine that I hear all the time, that there's somehow a technical problem to drive high temperature industrial processes with electricity and that we need to burn something instead. It's actually exactly the opposite. Electricity can generate any temperature you want, and combustion is inherently temperature limited by the physics of it. So if you look at all the highest temperature industrial processes like electric arc furnace steel making or the production of graphite, they're all electrically driven processes. So if the problem is not technical, then what is it? Well, it's techno-economic. The problem is you cannot get baseload clean energy that is inexpensive enough to compete with fossil fuels. You can only get it at that variable rate. So that is why thermal energy storage is necessary to do the electrification of heavy industry, not because there's a technology limitation, but a techno-economic one. So the Energy Innovation Report goes through a lot of this, goes through the basic techno-economics. And I want to emphasize, Antora is not the only company that has seen this opportunity. There are, at least a dozen or so startups around the world that have seen the essentially arbitrage potential between extremely cheap variable renewables and the price folks are paying for industrial heat, and seen that there is an opportunity now that has not existed any time before now to decarbonize profitably without subsidy in these industries.
Great. So we're hearing about all this exciting progress from all of your companies, some exciting, first projects, first customers. But of course, we know that there's still a very long way to getting to scale. So apart from, competition from existing industrial heat sources, what are some of the key challenges to actually getting to widespread adoption of your various technologies? And if you want to comment too, since we don't want to just talk about the challenges, what are some policy, mechanisms, options that you see on the table as helping to address some of those challenges and barriers? Maybe we'll start with Brandon here, because one thing that I think I also recently saw is that VIA received an R&D grant from DOE to look at another sector besides pulp and paper into chemicals. And so wanted to see if you want to share a bit more about that, as well as kind of going through what are the challenges to actually getting there to, that industry to other industries.
Absolutely. To start with the challenges, maybe I'll mention two things. One is supply chain has been consistently challenging, and I think this is probably universal as companies start to grow and scale, just being able to get long lead time items and making sure that's not a gating factor. I think the other one, and pick up on what Ben mentioned earlier, is reliability. So the industries we're working with have been up in operation for decades. There's not a lot of brand new pulp mills being built. I think the average mill in this country is about 60 years old, some more than a century, so that means they've had a solution that does work for that amount of time. So, really being able to de-risk enough that they're willing to take a chance on a new technology and adopt something. It has to be really reliable, and also requires a lot of intense partnership, sharing information, and getting to a point where, building in some redundancy. So for some of our initial systems, we're plugging into the existing process, but as a fallback, if something were to happen, if there was an upset with our system, it doesn't shut down production, it just defaults back to the current business as usual. So maybe not the most efficient way to design things over the long haul, but over the short term really helps reduce that adoption risk. And yeah, thank you for teeing up on our recent success with a DOE grant through the former Advanced Manufacturing Office, now EERE, I believe. So we're selected for that to move into our second application in the chemicals space. So specifically treating spent acid. So black liquor is on the very caustic end of the pH scale, so we decided to go all the way to the other side and treat acids. So at the moment, this is a pretty centralized process where facilities that are using specifically sulfuric acid, where we're starting out, will treat it. Once it's contaminated to a certain point, we'll then ship it to a central facility where it gets neutralized or thermally processed and regenerated. So our vision is, well, we can build these membrane systems that are more energy efficient and pretty modular. We can scale it up or down so it's the right size for the facility, and actually do this treatment and regeneration on site. And so having this support from the DOE is really critical for helping us staff up and get these R&D projects off the ground. So starting earlier on the TRL scale. And then I think a little bit later on, I'm very excited about, as a few folks have mentioned, the Office of Clean Energy demonstrations to help companies take those last couple rungs up the TRL scale. And then beyond that, once we're a little more mature, things like the Loan Programs Office as source of financing is super critical.
Great, thanks, Brandon. Thanks for sharing a bit more on kind of what you see in the future as well for VIA. Maybe next we'll go to Ben. So what do you think are some of the key challenges that X Energy will face in really scaling? And how do you think additional policies can help address that?
Yeah, thanks very much for that question. So really quickly, on the topic of broad policy and what's driving, I think, a lot of what's going on today, it's worth recognizing that we've been successful over several decades in bringing technologies to market, often when there was a sustained and pretty solid approach to subsidizing a given technology as it came to market. Now, historically, we did that with an ITC for solar and a wind PTC that really helped bring some technologies along. With the adoption of the IRA last year, one thing that I don't know is broadly understood, many in this room probably get it, is that really the ITC and PTC put on the table became flat for technology for the first time. So there had been a subsidy that was available for some large nuclear technologies in the past, but it really wasn't highly effective in bringing technology to market. Now, for the first time, we have a clean energy ITC and PTC that doesn't care what type of technology you're deploying. It's solely about whether or not the technology is zero or really near zero carbon for carbon capture. So that's been, I think, a really helpful indicator to the market that this is going to be a sustainable approach on the U.S. side. In addition to that, we at X Energy are thinking about how we're going to scale our reactor deployments. Now, we're not talking about, these are not small projects, right? They're relatively small mega projects, but they're still big projects. In the U.S., we have not successfully done mega projects outside of a handful of things, especially LNG export terminals, which have been done pretty much on time and on budget. But otherwise, we've been pretty unsuccessful in mega projects over the last several decades. So when we look at the drivers of those projects that have kind of gone over budget or over schedule, and this isn't just nuclear, but just broadly across the industry, we've recognized that there are a lot of capabilities in the oil and gas sector. It's one of the other reasons that we're really excited about Dow's participation in our project as our partner and customer, because they are a mega project company that does mega projects well around the world on a regular basis. So the number one thing we can do as a company to allow for the scale that we expect to take off is to deliver our projects on time and on budget. That is the single most important thing we can do. And I think that's true for a lot of different technologies, but it's very true in nuclear, where we've got a stigma that we're fighting against due to history on projects. The second thing is we have a supply chain challenge that we all face. Any new industry here, I think, represented on this panel, you've got a whole bunch of different supply chains that feed into our technologies. Graphite is one that we mutually share, and graphite is growing globally. But we as a company have nuclear supply chain challenges that are a little different. And we need to grow the number of suppliers that are ready to support our needs as we expand from a single project in our first year to multiple projects, and then ultimately to an exponential growth that we're expecting. So those supply chain issues cut across a lot of different areas. But today, I think it's fair to say that the nuclear supply chain's been pretty well decimated for a while. We have a nuclear fuel supply chain issue. I think you might have heard a little bit about that earlier. And there are some great policies that are being debated right now in the House and the Senate to try to help drive to market a new type of enrichment that's required, not just for our technology, but for many others. And that's high assay, low enriched uranium. And once that is brought to the market for an initial deployment, it's highly modular and scalable. So as we sell reactors, we'll sell then fuel fabrication upstream from there. And you go up further stream, and I think the enrichers will be able to modularly deploy their enrichment technology as well. So, these are challenges, but at the core of all of those challenges, the number one way to solve them is cash. Cash is always king, I get it. But we did a study about a year ago for a very large industrial client in the US that wanted to know, how many reactors we could deploy at a given site to decarbonize both steam and electricity. And they wanted to know, could we deploy tens of reactors at that one site by 2032? And we worked with them on this answer, and the short answer that came back to us was, yes, absolutely, but it means cash, and it means cash earlier. So, things like solid understanding of the policy realm that you're working in is important. Things like the market moving in the direction of adopting these new technologies is important. And our ability to deliver our first project on time and on budget is critically important, because then we will see people being able to push money in earlier so that our supply chain can actually begin to expand their production capabilities. It's not a broken supply chain, it's just a small supply chain. And it requires the ability to infuse more cash from new sources and to scale projects like what we've seen in the world of IPPs around wind, solar, and natural gas plants.
Thanks, Ben. Last, we'll go to you, Andrew. So, you've enticed us all with an option that could be lower cost than, Henry Hub prices in the US. But what are the challenges to getting there? And what are some of the things that might help along the way?
Yeah, I'm going to use this to also talk a little bit about what our customers look like. So just to paint a picture of what one of these projects looks like, we have a large chemicals facility with a very large thermal load that is literally across the street from a wind farm that is curtailing or selling their energy at negative pricing over 30% of the time, 30% of the hours of the year. So this is a massive opportunity, and the idea of throwing away clean energy across the road from where you're burning coal or natural gas in a boiler to produce steam, it just hurts the soul a little bit. So, if you can cost effectively do that, why hasn't it already been done? The first thing is, this is a relatively new phenomenon. It's only in the last few years you've had that really, really low cost variable renewable electricity. But the other thing is that there are policy barriers. So a lot of this, some of this is at the federal level, but a lot of this is also at the state and local level. A thing that we found pretty challenging is just looking, for example, at utility laws and policy. Can you actually run a line underneath that road going from the wind farm and bring that otherwise wasted electricity to the chemical facility? In some states, yes. In some states, not. I can't tell you how many times our head of business development comes to me, tells me about a situation like this where we have this great renewables resource and a big thermal load. I'm like, all right, so we're good? And he'll say no, actually, because this is in, I won't name the state, X state, and the regulations are really terrible there, so this is probably going to be a few more years down the So that's one of the biggest challenges that we face and others in our industry face, how to get access to the cheap electrons when they're available. This comes, this comes up in a lot of different areas, but one area that would be particularly useful is just how rates are structured. You know, a lot of industrial customers have fixed rates from utilities regardless of when they're using that power. So, you know, to a utility, they may say your rate is always going to be 7 cents a kilowatt hour, even if the energy is being produced and sold at negative pricing right across the street. So figuring out how you can get time of use pricing for industrial customers so they can take advantage of the really abundant wind and solar that we have in certain areas in the country, that's going to be super valuable. You know, a few of the other challenges are common across, you know, many of the technologies here. I think financing is just a huge one. When you look at the different barriers to scale, if you've removed a lot of them through, you know, the right go-to-market strategy, you know, having a robust supply chain, the one that you then run up into is how are you going to get the flows of capital needed? And, you know, we're talking tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in capital to be building new renewables, to be building these thermal energy storage units. So that's something that's always on our mind as we look toward the next 5 years. You know, how do we make sure that the technology is bankable enough, and how do we make sure that the regulatory environment is certain enough that folks are willing to put this enormous amount of cash behind producing a large amount of very low-cost energy. You know, I want to go on a positive note here on the kind of policy-adjacent side, which is the federal programs that have supported. You know, it sounds like a common to all three of us has been a lot of incredible support in the early stages of technology development. And just want to emphasize for Antora how important that was. You know, our first major funding into the company, before we had any substantial private funding, came from ARPA-E. We received a $3 million grant from ARPA-E when we were still 4 people in the company. We're now a little over 50, but 4 people, no lab. It was essentially just a detailed techno-economic analysis of why this should work, and that was it. And so I just want to emphasize things like that. I am not sure that Antora would be a company today, would be an entity, if it weren't for ARPA-E stepping in at the very early stage and supporting us. You know, for the first couple years of our life, more than half of the funding that we had came through ARPA-E. We also received funding from the Advanced Manufacturing Office at the time and California Energy Commission. So this is common to not just Antora, but many of these technologies. Those programs are working. They are seeding the new technologies that we need for decarbonization, and we should just continue to support things like that to make sure we have the pipeline of new ideas and new entrepreneurs for the next generation. The final thing I'll say is just continuing the support in a technology-neutral way. Most, but not quite all, technologies now have the investment tax credit, which is a really huge win for climate. But you know, as people in policymakers and agencies look at how do we support decarbonization, it's so important to find ways to support it in a technology-neutral way. There are so many new companies coming down the pipe folks may not be aware of, you know, that may not even exist at this moment. That could be a big part of decarbonization. Accidentally excluding any of those technologies and ideas is really going to be to the detriment of our ability to solve this problem. So something that I hope we're just always keeping in mind as we set up these new policies.
Thanks, Andrew. So it sounds like a lot of great appreciation for the types of policies and support that all 3 of your companies, you know, have had along the way, especially in the early stage, but certainly a long way to go. And other policies can be beneficial for some of those other pieces as you scale, the supply chain, you know, regulatory pieces, and then, of course, cash and financing to actually build all of these great projects. So I think we're running up right against time and lunch. And so with that, would really just love to thank our panelists. So please join me in thanking our panelists today.
All right, clean heat. So we've got this. We've got this. So huge thanks to Abigail and Breakthrough and the representatives from X Energy and VIA and Antora for a fantastic final discussion. What a morning. I am leaving inspired that we have a clear path to the solutions. I've got to do it every time. I've got to do it. To what some folks call the hard to decarbonize sectors. I hope your takeaways from this is that they're not hard, but that they're different to decarbonize, and that thankfully we have a really inspiring and growing cohort of advocates and breakthrough technologies and massive incumbent companies committed to decarbonizing, and most importantly, inspiring policymakers from Congress and the administration who are committed to getting this done in a bipartisan way while we keep America growing and competitive and strong. So I leave very inspired this morning. I want to give some particular thanks around the room, first and foremost to our partner in this effort and in industrial decarbonization work, Clean Air Task Force, and in particular, Lindsay Griffith, Evan Chapman, Emily Tucker, Ben Longstreth, and Conrad Schneider, and the many other CATFers who are here and involved in this work. I also want to give huge thanks to the ClearPath industrial and events teams. It's too long a list to list everybody, and they hate when I do this, but I'm going to list a couple of people. Colleen Moss, Dylan Carpenter, Jake Jennings, Jeremy Harrell, Katie Christian, Luke Bowler, Mallory Shevsky, Nika McMurray, Rafay Ghani, Savvy Bowman, Jay Faison, and the great, she really hates when I do this, Emily Johnson, who puts all of this together and lives and dies by these events. And everyone else in the room that I'm missing. And I want to thank again our partners in industrial advocacy who joined us and so ably moderated these discussions today, C2ES and Bipartisan Policy Center and Breakthrough Energy. Last, I want to say an amazing thanks to our amazing group of company speakers and technologists and really large incumbent companies here who joined us today, to all of the supporters of industrial innovation advocacy in this room, and to all of you for spending your morning nerding out with us and discussing this really exciting world of industrial decarbonization. When we started this, we weren't sure anybody would show up and come, and it turns out you did, and you care, and there's a lot of us here together, so I'm really, really excited about this going forward. So we're all going to be sticking around for a networking, very informal lunch, which will be served on tables outside this room. That room will open up as well, nothing formal, but please meet some new people and find some new opportunities that you didn't have before today. Thank you all again so much for coming. Thanks.